Welcome to Volya Radio. Slava Ukraini!
Hello, everyone. Here we are. Welcome to Volya Radio. We're up and running again with our Culture Hour and Book Club. My co-host is Adam. Adam is up. Glad to see you back after last week, Adam. Hope you're feeling better.
I am. It's winter here, and I got taken down by a by a winter cold early. Sorry, guys. Hi, Will. Hi, Lex.
Good to get it over with early in the season, I guess, right? Anyway, I'm glad you're back.
So, what did I miss?
What did you miss?
Fill me in. I know, guys. Welcome to Volya Radio. We're going to do book club in a little bit. It is 7 p.m., 6:59 p.m. Eastern time, and a whole bunch of other times everywhere else in the world.
Yes.
It's almost 5 p.m. for me.
Yeah, that is true. It's midnight London. It's 2 a.m. Kyiv, and it is just about 8 a.m. 7:59 a.m. in the workers' paradise of Perth, Australia. Did I do good, Will? Oh, he's not even up to speaker. Anyway, okay, so here we are. It's been an eventful week, and we have I think you, Adam, we've got some cultural things to talk about. We can go quickly over a little bit in the way of news. If you have anything particular that you'd like to talk about, we can do that. I've got a few things, and I see Will is requesting, so hang on a sec.
Yeah. In other news, wasn't surprised that Joe Rogan is a donkey. I already knew that, though. I remember I was talking to a coworker once, and he said, "Well, I get most of my news from Joe Rogan." Seriously, and I laughed.
Oh,
I couldn't help it. I sputter laughed in his face, and then I just awkwardly turned around and walked away. But that's my reaction.
Yeah, exactly. There's this is one of the things I struggle with constantly, and I'm sure many of us do. I was actually with somebody over the weekend who said to me, "Isn't it horrible? Biden is letting Ukraine use long-range weapons in Russia." And I said, "Well, thank God for that." Finally, she goes, "Well, war. President Trump, he's going to bring peace in 3 days." And it's you just want to tear your hair out because it's just there are people who are still buying all of this. I said to her, "Yeah, this thing called genocide. You heard of genocide? You heard about all these children who have been stolen, all the murders?" "Oh yeah, I heard about that." But it doesn't seem to, it doesn't. I guess people don't think of it as real or something. It's just very. Anyway, yes, it's you run into this kind of thing. I think we we do make some inroads with some people, and it's just hard. It's hard to go back to seeing that there's still people who are just completely clueless and completely taken in by the propaganda. Still, we have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, lots and lots. Hey, Tracy. Jak sprawy?
Thank you so much, Adam. Duży dziękuję. And that means welcome, everybody, in case you didn't know. So Adam just very kindly welcomed me in Ukrainian, which is wonderful. I was just listening to what you were saying about that Joe Rogan nonsense. And I found something quite amusing. And I don't know if anybody's seen it, but Klitschko has put a video out there addressing him and saying, "Let me come on your podcast and explain to you why it is that you are just repeating Russian propaganda." And that's one of the things that he mentioned, Robin, that you just mentioned about 3 days. Russia could not take Ukraine in 3 days, and they couldn't even do it and won't do it in 3 years either. And that is, of course, because of the heroism and sacrifice of Ukrainians. So I've reposted that video if everybody wants to go and have a look. And I am really looking forward to, well, of course it won't happen, will it? I doubt it very much that Joe Rogan will invite Vitaly Klitschko on his podcast. I think he might be a little bit frightened of him for some reason.
Yeah, especially an in-person interview. That would be interesting to see. Uh, yeah, yeah. Thank you for posting that, Tracy. It's good to see. It's good to see. Vitaly Klitschko is prominent enough that people who ordinarily wouldn't pay any attention are listen to him. So it's a wonderful thing that he was able to say
I
that.
think it was his lesser known brother.
Oh, well, which one? Wait. Oh,
I don't
Volodymyr?
know. He
Oh,
really
well,
he sure
they're both
looked like a Klitschko in the video I
well,
saw, right,
and
Tracy?
they're both world champion boxers anyway, so they're pretty interchangeable, I think, and they do look the same.
Thank you, Adam. I'm sorry about getting them mixed up. They do look very much alike, don't they?
Did you guys see the St. Javelin video and it was just like 10 seconds of Rogan being a little bunker baby, and then 5 minutes of street testimonial of Ukrainians saying, "Oh well," about nukes. I'll post that in the nest, and then I'll post my favorite meme about it right now, maybe two.
Yep, sounds good. It's one of the things I'm finding more and more as this goes on is we have to find reasons to laugh sometimes, and that sounds like a really good reason to laugh. Right. Will, welcome. Over to you.
Hey, Robin. Hey, Adam. Yeah, so culture comes to mind because because over the weekend I had one of these bizarre conversations like you did, Robin, where you feel like, how do you have to justify your existence at this stage? And it is because people are freaking out over the nuclear thing. I mean, look, we've tried to put the use of an intermediate range ballistic missile and short range ballistic missiles and all the stuff in context here. But the problem is, you just can't get people to listen for more than about 15 seconds unless they're asking you something. And I started probably what would have been an hour long conversation with somebody by a person asked me, so I'm going to retire from my regular work at the end of the year. Next year, I'm going to do something, instead of doing just a volunteer job, I'm going to do a lot more. I'm going to basically work full time on doing something positive for Ukraine to win the war. And people find out about this, and one of my oldest acquaintances in colleagues in work was you know they want to know why you care so much. I mean, what's in it for you, right? What's in it for you? Uh, I mean, the truth is, I don't really like borscht. I'm not a big culture fanatic. I've been to Ukraine a couple of times. I lived and worked in Russia for 14 years. You would have thought, I suppose, if you saw from the outside, that I would be fully on board with Russia winning. But so they're trying to he's trying to tease out of me. Is it, have you got a girlfriend there? Have you are you big like into the culture, all this sort of stuff? And I'm like, no. I mean, I'm not. You know what I'm really into? I'm into liberal democracy, surviving in the world, so that I don't have to worry about whether or not I can travel to the United States and get arrested by uh, the intellectual police when I try to go see people or anything. And people have a hard time getting their head around that you could be intellectually engaged and want something like this to happen, because the dis and anxiety generating information coming out is fully, it's even the ABC News here in Australia. They basically read the press releases from Russia, and both sides ism all this stuff. Like, Vladimir Putin said all this. Who gives a fuck what Vladimir Putin says? He lies all the time. And they never say that. They never say Russia lies. Russia lies about lying, and then Russia lies to try to cover up their lies. This is, they never put this stuff in context. We are eating ourselves alive by living in this environment where we don't have major actors that push back all the time. So I'm glad Klitschko dove in here and stuff. And I fail to see. Well, it just, we've gotten to the point in the world where everybody suspects you've got to have some venal self-interest in order to do something anymore. And it does get very depressing, Robin. Like you said, when conversation you had, it's like, why do I have to justify my existence about wanting liberal democracy to survive? You've got two children that are almost of military age. Why wouldn't you give a shit about this?
Yeah, that's thank you. Well, it's exactly right. There's something really wrong with the world where people who are fighting to try to save other people from aggression and subjugation are somehow put on the defensive. I mean, I get this. I get this a lot. Why do you care about Ukraine? Somebody the other day said, "Oh, well, you don't care about Israel." I said, I can walk and chew gum at the same time. I can care about Israel. And I can care about Ukraine at the same time. I ought to. What somebody said a while ago, you don't have to be Ukrainian to care about Ukraine. All you have to be is a human being. I mean, it's the people who don't care who should be explaining themselves, not us, in my humble opinion. Adam, yeah.
100% agree. I tried that in a heated conversation once with the children of military age. It did not go well. You might want to approach someone with some caution in real life. Zio, we had some trouble getting you up. Do you have something to add with that hand?
Hey, Adam. Yes, I do. Just wanted to chime in on the idea that Joe Rogan is giving his own personal opinion that Joe Biden's long range strike authority was a mistake. I'm here to say there's a few things in the art of the deal uh, by Donald Trump that sort of align the long range strike authority with the kind of positions that Donald Trump himself believes in or allegedly believes in. At least he publicly published this book to make the claims that he believes these things. And one of them is to maximize your options. That's to keep your possibilities open to create leverage, right? So by getting the maximum possible value out of these weapons by allowing them to strike into Russia, you're actually maximizing your leverage over Vladimir Putin by discouraging the movement of troops, by discouraging a massive storage of ammunition for use in the war in Ukraine. So I wanted to mention that all of these things are kind of aligned with, I think, Trump's kind of ideas around bargaining. Another one is to know your market, right? That could translate into knowing Vladimir Putin. That could translate into knowing that all of the millions of nuclear threats that they've made over the past 2 years follow a very particular strategy of trying to make lots of waves in Western media, but not necessarily trying to escalate to that level. For example, we have seen constant efforts at deconfliction. We saw the nuclear submarine that went to Cuba. We saw the Russians call the White House to tell them, hey, we're not actually going to put any nuclear weapons on this thing. We saw Russia call the United States to tell them, hey, we're going to launch a missile, but it's not going to be, armed with RBMs or ICBMs, right? So we've seen all of these kinds of sort of backroom Russian efforts to attempt to de-escalate the situation, but at the same time try to make as many headlines as possible. So I think by allowing these long range strikes and by acknowledging that the Russians are using this as a tactic, I think that that actually very much aligns with the history of Donald Trump's claims on what he believes is the best way to maximize your bargaining power in a negotiating situation. So I would encourage uh, kind of framing it in this way, because if you frame it as something that's aligned to Donald Trump's interests, then I think they might start to take a different look at some of these issues. Thanks.
Thanks, Theo. I think that's very important. Now, one of the things we talked about earlier today is that Mark Rutte, in talking to Trump, at this point we're stuck with Trump, and there's no point in alienating him, as if it's possible to alienate him further. But that we can play on his vanity, we can play on his the categories that he's laid out already. This is a very good argument. I like this a lot, and I'm going to try to use this in the future when I run into people who who complain about the use of long range weapons. It is true, and it's it's in terms of the economics. The economics of getting
And,
this war
but
over quickly. Well, yes, Will.
but
He sputters.
the first thing you've got to do every time you do it is those aren't long range weapons. We haven't
Oh,
given
all right. Good
Ukraine
point.
two fucking Tomahawk missiles yet, right? They have 300-kilometer short range ballistic missiles that are significantly shorter range than anything that Russia's been using since the beginning of the war. Don't fall into this trap of language that I've been bitching at the ABC about forever, and then they called ICB an IRBMs. Words have meaning, folks. Short range weapons are not an escalation 3 years in when used against other short range and medium range weapon using countries. So yeah, I mean this is a problem. Don't ever be an asshole like me. Don't ever let somebody call an ATACMS a short range a long range weapon.
I stand corrected again. You've corrected me on this before, and I'm not good with the terminology, but you're absolutely right.
Honestly, in this context, this is as bad as saying the Ukraine.
Oh boy, got me with that one, Will. All right. Yeah, no,
I don't know
it's
about that, but
well, he's trying to make his point,
his, I know he's busting the wills all over the place, but he does have a point. And language matters. And you know me, I'm always policing people saying, it's Hoyla, not Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin. So, what can
It's
I
Sauron.
say? Sauron, okay. Go ahead, Lexicon.
Yeah, well, we know we're stuck with this jerk for 4 years. We're confident that he won't be able to change the Constitution or the law or whatever it is and do a Huilo on us, a Sauron on us. Anyway, 4 more years. But we're all doing like Pollyanna speak. Everybody's trying to tell themselves reasons why, according to his book. I mean, no, I'm not trying to hassle you. I'm forgetting the name. Who are we up here? You were talking
That
with
was
Zia.
Zio.
Zia.
I
Yeah,
don't
yeah,
think he was
Zia. I
making
remember.
excuses. I think this was an approach to,
No, I'm just
using
looking
his
at what we've heard for 2 weeks now. Is it 2 weeks since the 5th of November or something like that? So everybody's, I mean, obviously we're only human. We want to avoid the pain. We're trying to think up reasons why it might be not that bad. And so we're trying to think up all these reasons why this guy with all his vaingloriousness and stuff is he really might just like smack Thoron in the chops. And that may be true, but those arguments all sort of like say we take the book as you're doing, Zia, and say, oh look, he argues this, he argues that, aside from the fact that he didn't really write the book, as we know. But anyway, as if he's going to take some argument that he once made and say, well, now, according to my thinking, this guy, this turkey Sauron, does not merit winning this thing or getting a frozen line where he is right now. He's not going to do that. We talk about how, well, I mean, we know that he doesn't necessarily have any clear idea or ideology in his head, except that we know him by the company he keeps, as they say. And if we read, say, somebody like Woodward's various books, I think his third one on Trump and the Trump's White House has come out. So you see what's going on around this guy and the company he chooses to keep. And you look at what he actually did when he was a bit leashed, and it was nothing but tax cuts for very wealthy people and deregulation to favor very wealthy friends. And even though he has never read Project 2025, because we don't think he's ever read a full page of anything, the fact is that all his buddies that he's putting in place are working on that agenda. And
but
so, well, all I'm trying to say is that it doesn't need to be him, but the people he keeps company with have got themselves in one way or another aligned with Sauron. And so they've got an interest. I mean, he's going to supposedly appoint a negotiator and they're
Okay,
briefing it.
lexicon.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but the problem is here. You're not giving us any solutions. You're telling us why everything is terrible,
I'm not
and I
telling you about a
agree with. No, I
solution.
agree with you. But
Okay,
the
well, I'll
point is,
tell
what
you
we
what
have to find. We have to
my
find
solution
ways
is.
of. Yeah.
What
Okay.
makes me feel better is that it's Ukraine that's going to determine. First of all, there's something's going to happen, like um, the prez or his negotiator are going to come up. They're going to put a deal before these two folks. He's going to phone them each in turn, and neither one of them will like the deal. And so the trick for the challenge for Ukraine is to not make it look like they're the ones saying no. That's going to be very tricky. And what Ukraine is doing right now is setting up all kinds of things that Russia cannot abide by, like Ukrainians on their territory, the part they actually know that even Ukraine acknowledges is their territory. Things like this. I mean, clearly they're being held at Pokrovsk and Chasiv Yar and a number of other places. If you watch some of our tactical people and Chuck, for example, the stuff we're seeing for these couple of weeks, um, if the weapons come in anyway, Ukraine is going hell bent for leather to put itself in the best position possible, and they may both tell the press to screw off and carry on, which is the most likely thing in one format or another. The only thing is, does Ukraine end up? Of course, the press will make them look like the ones who won't agree to give anything, and that's the challenge. But I'm just saying that, of course, this is what we want to do: is figure out reasons why um, Trump might do something rational, or at any rate, where he would get a good deal. And we know very well it's true that he would get a way better deal if he'd stick with Ukraine. But I think what I'm saying is there are political forces around him that he runs with that are trying for something else. And the same reasons why it's hard to make sanctions stick, why it's hard to really come down on the oil and gas industry, are the interests, the very real material interests of those those big firms that are gaining a benefit, or the various German companies and American ones and others we know that are just waiting, just salivating to get back in the game once they can do trade with the Sauron again. So that's what I think. I think the main thing is what we have always put our trust in. I think Ukraine's doing a brilliant job at the strategic stuff. I think they're playing the diplomatic discussion very, very well. And we just support that, have confidence in it, do what we can. And yeah, time will tell. But
It's
yeah, I'm pretty
yeah. It's
skeptical.
it's the do that we what we can that I'm not hearing here. You've outlined how terrible everything is, and I agree with you. But what do? We just sit here and wait and hope that Trump doesn't cut off all aid to Ukraine. I think we
Hey,
have to
is
try
that
to
what I
do
said?
something. No, but this is you're not giving me any steps of anything we can do to make a damn bit of difference.
Well,
And I think we really we need to be looking at that, not just we all know it's terrible, and repeating over and over again how terrible it is not going to help anything. I just and Theo, this was a response to you, so I want to go back to you, and then we have James and Will. Go ahead, Theo.
Hey, so I still think that there's a pretty big gap between Putin's peace plan and Trump's peace plan. I think that's going to cause a lot of bargaining friction. I think Putin wants control over a lot of territory that he doesn't fully control. I don't think that Ukrainians are going to be willing to come to the table to make that type of peace deal. I think ultimately what will result in peace is if both Ukraine and Russia determine that peace is going to be the better option and less costly than war. And I think that long range strike authority helps both parties get closer to that because I think long range strike authority will help erode Russian power. One of the things that we saw in 2022 when they first introduced HIMARS to the Ukraine conflict was where they struck a bunch of different command posts and eliminated a lot of generals and colonels and majors with these long range strikes. And that really affected the Russian military's ability in 2022 to form a cohesive fighting force, to maintain the chain of command, to basically keep all of these units performing in the ways that they needed to be performing. So, what have we seen now recently in the past week? Well, they just took out a Russian general with long range strikes, and a bunch of North Koreans. So I think ultimately this is something that's going to degrade Russia's military capability. I think it's going to get them closer to being willing to sit down at the bargaining table. And I think that's why we need to keep sort of messaging this as a positive development, because ultimately it does bring us closer to the peace deal, the peace table. Thanks.
Absolutely. Remember, though, medium range, maybe. I'm sure Will was going to say that. I'm just stealing his thunder. Will, that's a calling all Willibusters. Are you
I
there?
thought James was first.
Oh, James was first. He had his hand up.
I did.
Did he give up?
I do. Is my
It
hand
was
down?
gone.
Well, it
Sorry.
is now, I guess. I'll be quick. Well, I think that's great to know that Trump might be malleable and useful to the cause of Ukraine, but I've decided that I'm just going to be offensive and say that what every president has done until Biden hasn't been enough to fulfill our obligation that we made in the Budapest Memorandum and now also in the Genocide Convention, and that any lessening of aid or any loosening of sanctions or any overt or covert action that aids Russia in their war is essentially a genocidal act. And that's just how I'm going to treat it. I don't know how our politicians will like that, but I want to make it clear. I've already been saying it online. I haven't gotten around to letters yet or phone calls with this message, but that's the next thing. And I think that it's a real affront. I'm hearing some of the GOP say really good things about like just how shitty it is the way that Ukraine is getting treated in this, and I agree. And so I know that there are enough voters out there. If they get the true picture, they will be very sympathetic to Ukraine. And I think people just need to know how this is a war that is the United States and Germany and all the other reluctant players. It is theirs to lose this war because right now, definitely the alliance behind Ukraine can win this war, and they are on a trajectory to do it, but not if somebody goes off the rails and abandons Ukraine's plans for victory and for peace. And the negotiation doesn't have to go far from what's already been written. So, thanks. I hope everybody can keep pointing back to the plans that Ukraine has made because they're better than anybody else's, and they are more helpful to more nations around the world than anybody else's plans, especially small countries. So, thanks.
What, James? She says the gloves are off? Okay. Then I'm going to add my little thing to
Boom.
the Trump to the Trump whisperer somewhat silliness. If the basis of what the Kremlin has on the orange guy is compromat, I don't think it matters anymore. And this is definitely a positive for Ukraine, because one thing I know about powerful people is they do not like to be under the thumb or blackmailed by other powerful people. And since the Epstein 100 hours of Epstein tapes of like, the world's most famous pedophile talking about how he's Trump's best buddy, did not, then whatever P tapes or whatever the and isn't smart, but ruthless people know how to survive, and I think he's probably realized that. But that being said, Trump whispering is kind of silly. We just got to wait and see and write letters. I don't know. I'm bad with solutions too, Robin, but Will isn't.
Right, and look, the solutions here are, to be honest, I think that Zio's onto something, Robin's onto something. You, I don't. I think Trump is going to be an absolute chaos shitstorm. But the truth is, too, he's all play on the guy's venality and his ego and his vindictiveness. One of the things Trump always likes to do is throw over everything that was done from the guy before him. Doesn't matter if it looked good, that doesn't get any analysis. Just anything that was done before me is always a bad idea. And if I was a Ukraine supporter and could get in front of Trump, uh, well, he'd never let me in front of it. But if a person could get in front of Trump at the right time, right when he comes in, after he comes into office, when any of the first bad thing happens and he needs a win, uh, do offer him the deal of the century. Offer, with the if Europe got Europeans and Britain and whoever the coalition of the willing got together $5 billion, which is nothing for them, and told Trump, hey, Biden really fucked this thing up, and he'd go, yeah, he sure did. A president who wanted to cement his role in history and cement his legacy as the savior of the free world would basically sell Europe, sell, not give. Not you want to look great at home about being the best deal maker in the history of the world, and you want to save the free world and cement your legacy. How about you sell 1,000 Bradley armored fighting vehicles out of storage in America that are surplus to you, and a commensurate amount of armor? I'm telling you, this war is going to be won with the boring, and the boring is sitting in U.S. storage in deserts in storage in America. If the United States provided 300 Bradley armored fighting vehicles, and a commensurate amount of other equipment to Ukraine under the prior to the supplemental being passed. $91 billion in total. $91 billion worth of army surplus, half gutted the Russian military. So, if the United States was to crack open their storage for sale, not for giving away, because so Trump can say, "Oh, I didn't give anybody anything. I sold the Europeans for $5 billion, 1,000 armored fighting vehicles, 1,000 Bradleys, and a commensurate amount of tanks and Strikers and Humvees and everything out of storage in America." This would only about half touch the stored surplus that America has in stock, specifically held for this reason. Folks, this is the rainy day. They held all that stuff for a rainy day, and it is fucking pouring in Europe right now. It is pouring, and all of the Bradley armored fighting vehicles ever built, all 6,500 of them ever built, cost 5.7 billion US dollars. So, if the United States was offered $5 billion for scrap in the form of 1,000 Bradley armored fighting vehicles and a commensurate amount of the tanks, other things that would go with them, right? Just scale off the 1,000 armored fighting vehicles. If they need 1,000 armored fighting vehicles, they probably need about 250 tanks. They need about another 500 or 600 strikers. They need every Humvee they're willing to give up, and they could do all that. Trump could sell all that to Europe for $5 billion. He'd be doing the deal of the century for Americans. That stuff has exactly zero value to America other than its use when the storm comes and the storm is upon you. So if America could make money on that deal, it's an insignificant amount of money for Europe, and the only place in the world that has this level of army surplus in storage is America. So if they're not willing to do it, then it's going to be a 10-year war. Ukraine needs to produce its way out of this problem with European help and what they can cobble together, or the European, all 27 countries in Europe need to get together and coordinate, which just, it isn't happening. So the clearest way to solutions here are army surplus from America that could be sold. And I know that Trump could be talked into that deal because of the things that Zio and others have said. It's like the Elvis Costello song, Two Little Hitlers. The two little Hitlers are only going to get along for a short while, and then one of them's got to be in charge and on top. And the thing is, no matter how pathetically stupid, venal, egotistic, and what a dumbass he is, uh, Trump's always going to be more powerful than Putin because Putin's got nothing behind him. He's got nothing. Trump has advantages to him that when push comes to shove and Putin goes too far, overplays his hand with Trump, uh, he's Trump is going to turn on him, and as viciously as he does anyone else. And and as Adam says, once you get to the top position, it doesn't matter who's got what on you. What, he's going to shame Trump into something? Shame? Honestly,
It would matter for other politicians, but it
yeah,
doesn't matter
it
for
might, but this
the
guy
cult
has
king.
he has no
He's
bottom.
shameless, yeah.
So you have to, but he can be played, and this is what I'm saying. Attempt to try to play him, and that's not a fanciful thing, Lexicon. It's a realistic solution that could be proposed to
No, I'm
him
with you.
that I know he'd probably buy on. And
And I,
the other thing needs to be done that I will be controversial about is Ukraine needs to press on with its own medium range ballistic missile capability, the Grim 2, and they need to be ready to use those the next time Ukraine it December 29th, I'm telling you, Russia is going to do another massive missile attack on Ukraine to try to shut off all the power and the heat to the rest of the cities that they possibly can. You know it's coming. You know it's coming. Ukraine needs to prepare themselves to respond, and they need to respond in Moscow and St. Petersburg. Unless this turns into a medium range missile exchange war that really, really does generate a ballistic missile and really, really does raise the specter of a potential nuclear war. There's no capability. Ukraine needs to absolutely escalate as much as possible the way Russia's doing. And if they don't and they can't, then the West is going to let Ukraine get carved up. And Ukraine can't. Ukraine has to do this for itself. If Europe wants to help, they can get them the armored fighting vehicles, because the only way this ends is if Ukraine gets equipped fully, and if they can force Ukraine to get equipped fully by raising the specter of what's this likely to come and will have to come. If Ukraine can't get into a medium range missile exchange with Russia, Russia will never stop doing the attacks on their cities. They have to deliver to Russia the exact commensurate punishment that they're offering Ukraine in each and every time. That's how détente works. It's scary, it's anxiety inducing, but guess what? They have to go there, or the West is going to let them get carved up.
Yeah, thank you, Will. Alexa, over to you.
yeah, I'm with your plan, Will. And what I think is we got to get that in front of, whoever it is, right? I mean, Zia said there's a lot of GOP folks who are talking a very good line. And I don't know, Adam, maybe you know this. On the CBC on Saturday mornings, there's a program called Day 6. They were talking to, you guys would maybe know the name, I've forgotten it, the GOP head of the Senate Armed Services Committee. And so he was, Brent Banbury or whoever he is, was interviewing him. And this guy had very good stuff to say. I mean, totally pro-Ukraine. Ukraine absolutely has to win this war. No baloney about what Ukraine has to cede and all that garbage and why it's important in America's interest. I think this deal needs to be put in front of people like that who, as I say, I mean, Trump has some informants like this. It's not that he fails to listen to anybody in his own Senate, for example. And yeah, the Senate GOP members in the Foreign Affairs Committee, I think it is, are basically, I think, very good from what I've heard. So, I mean, I've fed up with all these commentators, even real good guys like Jamie Shee and so on. They're still all talking about both sides are going to have to yield something and so on. No, I agree. It's exactly the deals that the American government can be convinced to make. And I mean, America has got an asset. America has got all this fabulous stuff that actually works. It does what it says it'll do. And the Ukrainians fight those Bradleys like nobody in this world has ever done. I hope Hollywood makes movies of them. They've got all kinds of incredible equipment. Absolutely right that it's Joe Biden who screwed up royally by not making this deal. And I think every way that it could be shown that that was a mess, and we were bemoaning it for years, weren't we? I mean, we were screaming and yelling. I think it probably took a year before we even realized that America was not allowing the Ukrainians to use theirs or anybody else's weapons to hit into Russia. We were flabbergasted when it occurred to us, but that was the case all along. It was ridiculous. But all this press that is now going around groaning and saying, oh, well, the Ukrainian people are going to have to get realistic and their government with them. And Zelensky is losing support and all this baloney. No, I think this deal needs to get put in front of the Republican senators in the armed services and the foreign affairs committees, and put in front of the Ukrainians. You know any guys who know any guys? I mean, I think that this deal, they probably already, I mean, they're always two steps ahead of us. I think that that kind of deal is the sort of thing that in the back rooms, Ukraine has to be talking about too. And they probably are, except that there's so many leaks, they're afraid to talk about it. But if Donald ever gets himself over there to Kiev and there's a standing invitation, I think that it would be excellent if somebody put that deal to his ear or to that of a person accompanying him with a steno pad. But great ideas, you guys.
Well, Zelensky kind of already did that, and
The Yanks
in that,
leaked it.
and the Yanks leaked it, but it's a great idea. Like, Ukraine has this amazing military capacity now that they created under duress, and yeah, Ukrainian soldiers could replace American soldiers in all those boring, easy posts all through NATO's Europe, and give Donnie a big win for his isolationist base. And yeah, so I think we had Zio and Tracy.
Hey, I just wanted to tack on to something that Will was mentioning about kind of the value in what we have gotten in terms of the military aid that we've given. It's not just the Russian military that we've taken out. We've taken out like 80 to like 90% of like the Soviet inheritance, like over 40 years of Soviet production to in Ukraine. So I think it's important to add that context because the Russian military is only making like 500 new tanks, but then they're taking 2,000 out of storage and refurbishing them. And that's kind of like the whole trend of this war is that they have a huge, huge inheritance that they've been able to dip into this stockpile. But that's not going to be there forever. That stuff's running out. So the current rate of war and conflict in Ukraine is not sustainable for Russia. But you know, I would prefer that we do not take an approach in terms of our aid that prioritizes concepts, theories like attrition. I don't think that serves anybody. I am more in the mind of mobile warfare, combined arms, all of these preferred ways of warfighting that we like to do in the West. But yeah, just wanted to reiterate that you know, you do get a lot of bang for your buck here. And the other point I wanted to make was that the Marines and the Navy, have basically decided that M1 Abrams, the Bradleys, all of these vehicles are way too heavy to be effective and to be logistically supplied in a Asia Pacific region. So they are looking to move to lighter systems with a lot smaller logistical footprint. They're moving towards area denial missile type of weapons. And so the one sort of geostrategic enemy that we do have, where these things are useful and where these things are valuable, is Russia. So it's not like donating Bradleys and Abrams are degrading our security capabilities against China, because that's, you're going to put a tank on a boat and use that in combat. No. So it's just it's something to consider. Thanks.
Thanks, and that is a great point too. Part of why they've been slow walking the more Bradleys and more tanks, the Abrams tanks, to Ukraine is supposedly because we might need them in an Asian conflict. And if the Marines have just made the point that these are not adaptable to those circumstances, then best thing is to give them to Ukraine to take them off our hands, so we don't have to decommission them and spend a lot of money doing it. I like it. Thank you very much. JTS, over to you.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to a couple of commentators. Zio, great points. I know the last Marine Commandant. Yeah, the Marines have totally divested themselves of their tank force, and is trying basically to a lighter, less logistical footprint to conduct distributed ops. With the concept of smaller Marine forces all across these Pacific islands with missiles and drones that could counter any Chinese threat. I'd be interested to hear from Will about that, because being in Australia, I know that there's a larger Marine presence there now. To go back to Lexicon's points, I think you're talking about Mike Rounds, the senator from South Dakota. Yeah, he made some great points. I think there's more Republicans, GOP senators that are pro-Ukrainian. What I think needs to happen is they need to get more on television, more on these right-wing media spaces, Fox News or whatever, to explain why Ukraine is important, because I think most Americans would support Ukraine's fight. And then my other point was, as far as the info space goes, I'm sure everybody on here saw what Joe Rogan said maybe a day or two ago. I did see the response today from was it Vladimir Klitschko, the mayor of Kyiv, who basically challenged Rogan to have him on for 3 hours, which I think would be a great thing, because unfortunately, a lot of Americans, form their worldviews from listening to podcasts like Joe Rogan. So to have him on there would be a great thing. Thanks.
Oh, couldn't get my mic off. Thank you very much. Yeah, that's a good point. I must say some podcasts are worth listening to. For example, Volya Radio has podcasts over on Spotify, so those are good to listen to. But yeah, you make a very good point. I wanted to mention just before we have about 13 minutes left before book club. Poor Adam prepares every week.
Do you see Tracy's
Oh,
hand?
no, I don't see Tracy's
Tracy's
hand.
had her hand up
No,
for a long
Okay, let's
time.
go to Tracy. It's not up on my screen. I'm so sorry, Tracy. Go ahead.
No problem, Robin. I understand, and I shall be quick, Adam. I just wanted to say that this week, in terms of good news, Norway, Denmark, Sweden and Lithuania provided funding for the Ukrainian defence industry, in particular for long-range drones and missiles. That was the keywords that I was looking for there. Norway also allocated 500 million kroner, which is $45 million. Denmark is going to continue investing in the defence industry as they have been doing according to the Danish model, and will increase the support for 2025 to 2.2 billion euros. Sweden has now joined the Danish model to finance the production of Ukrainian long-range drones, and Lithuania signed a memorandum of understanding which provides for the first tranche of 10 million euros for the production of Ukrainian weapons, in particular within the framework of the Palanitsia project.
God bless the Nordics. They really, this is absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for that news. It's very good to hear. I just wanted to mention, Adam, I want to give you a few minutes for at least one of your cultural stories. This is supposed to be the cultural hour, and we always get off on news, and poor Adam prepares week after week, and we don't get to it. So I just very quickly want to mention the fundraiser that War Doggo is running.
I started it.
Yeah, well, yeah, we all did. We had earlier today, Tracy and I had War Doggo and Gerza, the commander of the SBU Alpha unit that we're raising, that of War Doggo is helping get some very important equipment. It was very interesting. We had some trouble because the connectivity was a problem, and we're going to actually have him on next Sunday. He had some stories about 2014 and the invasion that could tell us, and he wasn't able to because of the connectivity. But anyway, we have a fundraiser. You can see up in the nest. It's the first tweet. They are. It's their fundraiser. They're raising money for Vortex Scope, pulsar thermal sights, red dot sights, and these helmets that are needed to mount all of this stuff on. This gives them a tremendous advantage. They're able to see farther in a distance. They're able to see in lack of light. Ukraine owns the night, and it's only because they have these capabilities. So this is a very important thing. SBU Alpha is a highly respected unit, one of the most effective in the Ukrainian military. It's special operators. They operate behind enemy lines and do a tremendous amount of good. So if you feel so moved, you can go check the second tweet in the tweet that I've put up in the nest. Gives you the link to Sunflower Seeds Ukraine, which is the organization that is collecting the money for War Doggos for this unit. When you get there, it's really interesting. One of the things we like about working with Sunflower Seeds is it's totally transparent. You can see in real time as donations come in. You can see the amounts, and we can see if you'd like to give anonymously, that's absolutely fine. That's also a possibility. But this way, we know exactly what's being raised, and at the end of the fundraiser, we will give probably one of us who's working with them will give Sunflower Seeds a $40 fee for the wire transfer, and they will wire this to the NGO in Ukraine that War Doggo works with to actually purchase this equipment and get to SBU Alpha. So the need is great. The need is not going away, and we at this point, I really think we're in an inflection point where we can push Russia over the precipice if we keep on pushing. And this is one way. This particular fundraiser is one way that we in our little way can make a difference. So I commend it to you, especially if you're feeling frustrated and don't know what to do. Here's something you could do. And even a $5 or $10 contribution means a lot to these guys. They see how many people support them. So anyway, thank you. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to I'm going to go back to Tracy, and then we're going to go to Adam for at least one cultural story before we start book club. Go ahead, Tracy.
Sorry, Robin, Adam, but I had to just say also they have elite doggos because SBU Alpha Doggos won awards today and were given medals. And if you want to see the pictures, check my profile. Thank you.
Oh, very nice. Thank you. Yeah, I will do that. That's wonderful. It's wonderful. These guys, they they're not doing this to get praise or anything. They're doing it because they love their country and they're trying to do their best. But it's really nice to see when they get the praise that they deserve. That's great. Thank you so much, Tracy. That's our SBU girl, Tracy. She keeps up on all of this stuff. Okay, Adam.
Okay, well, which one did you want to do?
I see James's hand up. Let me look at the list.
We got a Jameser.
I just wanted to say it's hot sake night tonight, and so I'm going to be curled up and hot sake'd and listen.
Oh, good. So come back on in an hour. You'll be well lubricated. Adam, that first one about propaganda, I thought was sort of interesting, but it's up to you. This is your thing. So pick the one that you're most interested in looking at right now.
I thought he was talking about compromat again. Someone got hot sake in a St. Petersburg hotel room. No. So let's go to this Ukrainer one. Decolonizing culture. Ukrainian artists banned and stolen by Russia. Because it's not too long. Oh my God.
We can do part one.
All right, part one. So for centuries, Ukraine. So this is from Ukrainer.net, and it's a really good website. They're making a movie, and it's sort of an NGO that kind of like UkraineWorld.org that tries to get Ukrainian perspectives into the English-speaking media sphere. So, for centuries, Ukraine was effectively a colony of Russia, with Ukrainian culture constrained and forced to develop under deeply complex and often dramatic conditions. Ukrainian artists face relentless repressions, bans, and persecution from their self-proclaimed Big Brother, leaving them with a stark choice, not their self-proclaimed. The Big Brother's self-proclaiming. That's how I understand it. That's how I want to understand it. Stay true to their culture, risking their careers and sometimes even their lives. They serve Russian governments, slowly losing touch with their roots, or try to navigate a precarious path between the two. This is why Ukrainian heritage includes many artists whose lives and achievements still wait proper reevaluation. Most importantly, it's essential to understand the mark Russia left on them at various points in their journeys. Understanding the complexities of history, uncovering connections, and reevaluating the past all contribute to addressing colonial traumas. In other words, this is the essence of decolonization, and Ukrainian art needs it just as urgently as every other area of public life. Within the decolonization project, Ukrainer brings together experts from diverse fields to explore how Russia has both physically and psychologically subjugated Ukrainians across different historical periods, and to discuss pathways for Ukrainians to finally sever all ties with the aggressor state. The first article series focused on the reparation of cultural property, delving into Ukrainian artists whom Russia had banned, appropriated, or otherwise silenced in attempts to suppress their talents and stifle their creative recognition. Ukrainer, in collaboration with the Projector Institute and Tatiana Filevska, creative director of the Ukrainian Institute, sheds light on key figures whose lives vividly illustrate the cultural colonization inflicted by Russia. Studying these artists reveals their vital role in both Ukrainian and global culture, underscoring the precise need to decolonize perceptions of the nation for Ukraine and the wider world. So, historical roots of Russia's Federation, I think is pronounced, cultural colonization. The historical origins of the Russian Federation colonialism can be traced to 1721, when the Muscovite kingdom declared itself the Russian Empire. Unlike classical Western empires, it held no overseas colonies and not many flush toilets, and did not segregate its people along racial lines, complicating global recognition of the Russia Federation's colonial influences and crimes it committed against indigenous cultures. However, the Russia Federation did aggressively subjugate neighboring peoples it deemed uncivilized, quote unquote. Over 300 years later, its narratives remain largely unchanged. The Russia Federation still seeks to deny Ukrainians and other peoples the right to their own state, culture, language, and identity. Policies such as Volyev's circular and M's decree, which banned the Ukrainian language and book publishing, along with extensive repression of the Ukrainian intelligentsia, and the stigma of inferiority, have left lasting impacts on Ukrainian identity. The Soviet Union continued, it's so hard to pronounce, the Russia's Federation colonial agenda. Tatiana Filevska, creator-director of the Ukrainian Institute, describes its purpose. the Russia Federation colonial policy was aimed at restraining and controlling cultural development in the colonies, the sphere where identity is formed and communicated for a particular people or nation. This is precisely why culture is seen as a dangerous thing. At the same time, the empire always feeds off its colonies, usurping and depleting their resources, including talent. Undoubtedly, the Rusian Empire sought to take the most talented, intelligent, and progressive individuals into its metropolis, and this pattern has recurred across generations, even during Ukraine's years of independence. The targeted destruction of the Ukrainian creative class represents an irreparable loss for both Ukrainian and global culture. The creative lives of artists, and often their physical existence, were forcibly and dramatically altered or brought to an end. It was the actions of the Rusian Empire and the Soviet Union that prevented them from writing texts, composing music, staging theatrical performances, creating sculptures, and more. Today, Ukrainians find themselves in perhaps the most intense phase of their war against the Rusian Federation, and for them, this conflict is fundamentally about decolonizing their culture. As a result, Ukraine's cultural heritage demands even more thorough research and reassessment to ensure that the enemy is not given any further opportunities to distort or appropriate its artists and their achievements. When rethinking or introducing an artist into Ukrainian discourse, it is essential to consider their social and cultural environments, as well as the messages they created, promoted, or opposed. Are there imperial narratives concerning Ukraine present in their works? How did they perceive their own identity? And was their self-identification freed from coercion? What were their perspectives and life choices? Understanding the context surrounding any artist is crucial. Regardless of our desires, art cannot be entirely separated from the social and political circumstances in which they exist. And so at 6 o'clock, that was just the intro to this supposedly short article. Just kept going. Just wasn't all the way loaded yet. Ukraine there is, a nonprofit organization, and they don't have very fast servers, but it's a fancy website. So as we get started on book club, I'll stick a few things in the nest, including a tweet about that article so you guys can finish reading it on your own, and then I will find our book club. We'll see if there's some book club verbiage too.
Great.
What say
Yeah,
you, Robin?
thank you. Yeah, that was very interesting. This is something that I can't tell you the number of times I've spoken to a Ukrainian who has talked about this second rank status that the Russians gave to Ukrainian culture, and it's really heartbreaking because for one thing, it's just such nonsense. It's Ukrainian culture has it, as far as I can see, really has it all over most of Russian culture. Most of the Russian culture that's worth mentioning is stuff that they stole from Ukraine. They don't have a lot to offer otherwise. And I remember talking to a friend who was talking. He grew up in Kyiv, and how he used to go and listen to Kyiv rock bands. We talked about, as you know, again, LZ, my absolute favorite band in the whole world. And he was saying, and this guy's a real Ukrainian patriot, but he was saying, as a teenager, young adult, he used to go and listen to these bands, and they were sort of second rank. They weren't these Russian powerhouses that everybody admired, but he liked them because they were ours. It was Ukrainian, and it's just it shouldn't. No one should have to ever feel that way, and especially this was put on them by the Russians for generations. I mean, it's going to take a long time, I think, for many Ukrainians to really feel 100% the pride and love for their own culture and language and history that they deserve to have. They should have, because they've been treated like crap for so many years by one Russian government after another. This didn't change from the czars to the Soviets to this whatever you call the Russian Federation, Adam. But yeah, it is. I think
Federation. That makes so much sense. Not really, though, right? I thought farteration make more sense because of the smell emanating.
Yeah, that works too. Okay, we're gonna go over to Lexicon, and then I want to get started on book club. Go ahead, Lexicon.
Well, yeah, this stuff sounds great. I really got to get into them a lot more. Then there's another thing that I was mentioning earlier today when we were having another cultural corner here, and that is, I guess, Suspilny, Ukrainian TV, has kind of reissued or something. Anyway, YouTube's batting them around again. Their series on the big Russian lie and lies, plural, and the one on so I guess I've seen them before, although they always seem new if you wait a couple years. But this week I just watched the one on history and the one on literature. And so they made all these good points about the great Russian literature and great Russian culture. And one of the points they're making is why the hell is nobody else's but Russia's has to be called great Russian literature? Like whoever talks about great British or great French literature. They're just French literature and British and American literature and Italian, so on. So where does this come from? And they talk about the fact that all of this has been promoted. Like there's a promotion of Russian literature, for example, everything else too, and translations of it into local languages around the world by huge armies from the time of the Russian Empire through the Soviet Empire and to this day, huge numbers of translators and professors and chairs, supported, financed chairs in universities all over the world, to the extent that you get people like Chekhov that have been translated into 100 languages. For God's sake, is it the new 10 commandments or something? Why is this so important? Even if the guy is considered a good writer. And the other thing they talk about is how their culture, specifically the literature in this series, is curated. That is, you had to, not only in Soviet times, in earlier times, there was a line on what this artist, what this author was saying. And what he was saying was about Russian culture and Russia and the thread of the greatness of Russia and whatever it was, including Dostoevsky's negative pessimism and deadly blackness, noirceur, that this was the line. And so you had to, and everything that they ever published had great long introductions and prefaces that taught you the line, including when they printed American crime fiction in Moscow, so that the line was always fed to people. And so they had to not only swallow their great writers, but also the line on how they should be understood. And so this kind of thing, so it's both promoting their own by financing it globally and in their own empire and squelching everybody else. So it's not really an accident and it's not by dint of sheer greatness, which is what we're supposed to believe by dint of repeating the word great, but by this shameless self-promotion, hugely financed by Russian empires through the decades and indeed the centuries. So Suspilny TV is pretty interesting, and you get very cogent. They don't go over the top, they're not horribly didactic. They're just really informative and kind of subtle or kind of, I would say, they express their points with a little bit of reserve, and so I think that they're quite accessible in that sense. So I think Suspilny is another one right up there with, as you say, Ukrainer. But thanks a lot for that, Adam. It's really interesting.
Yeah, thanks, Lexicon. Another one that's good too is Hromadska has a lot of really great YouTube uh, videos. Well, on all sorts of different topics. It really the explosion of Ukrainian production of Ukrainian of books about Ukraine, of YouTube clips about all sorts of things is really amazing. I also wanted to mention, Adam, you mentioned Ukrainer. Ukrainer is a wonderful site and really good in-depth articles. And it's interesting for anybody who's learning Ukrainian, the Ukrainian side of the site, there's different content than the stuff that's in English. I use it a lot. I pull articles out of there all the time to read with my conversation buddy, and they're well written. I find them, it's challenging, but I find that they're nicely written, and if you get to a certain point in your Ukrainian, it's a great place to not only get things to read, but get really interesting things. My conversation buddy, who is Ukrainian, is practically every time we read one of these things, he'll say, that's really interesting. I didn't know that. You get a lot of information out of it. So I highly recommend looking at Ukrainian, both English and in Ukrainian, if you know the language. And with that, and Linda has her. I'll be to you, Adam, and Linda has her hand up. And then
Two
yeah, go ahead.
quick comments about what Lexicon said. Could you imagine if, like, the English or the English literary world called like Irish writers like little English writers, like Dylan Thomas or someone like that? Like, it's unthinkable.
That's a great point.
Just the idea, like, from the start of calling someone little yourself, especially when they're the older of the two, like, oh, those are our little brothers. That's the mother of all our cities that they live in. It's like, what? But I've heard it's from, I think it was Fritziak in the last book club book, when he was saying that it translated badly from the minor and major in the Byzantine sense. But in any case, the fact that they still use Malorossia is just like, it just shows their own lack of self-confidence. And I will give you the audio representation of my favorite meme that illustrates top to bottom why Rusian literature is shit. French literature, I will die for love. British literature, I will die for honor. American literature, I will die for freedom. Russian literature, I will die. Okay, let's do book club.
Perfect. I love it. Oh man! As I've said it several times today, you have to laugh. We have to find things to laugh about, because otherwise, what are you going to do? That's great. I love it, Linda.
Well, Adam, I need some clarification. That word that you used, and now I don't know if I heard it right or if I'm remembering it right. Was it fartination?
Oh, now you're asking me to spell it and pronunciate it proper. I was saying farteration.
How do you spell that?
So just FARTERATION.
Okay, I'm gonna have to write that down because I might need to have a sweatshirt made with that on it. That is all. Thank you.
Thank you. Adam, speaking of Malorossia, which is I find, regardless of where it came from, it's really offensive the way it's used these days. One of my favorite new T-shirt is the one that President Zelensky had a couple of weeks ago. Make Russia small again. Anywho, okay. With that, I actually think. Right, exactly. All right. Okay, let's see. We are here. We are now going to transition over to book club. We are still reading Mychailo Wynnyckyj's Ukraine's Maidan, Russia's War, a Chronicle and Analysis of the Revolution of Dignity. And we are we just last week started chapter 9. It calls Bourgeois Revolution, and Lexicon had all sorts of reservations about that word, which I must say I do agree with her explanation. The bourgeois is not really the word we should be using here, but we're gonna. One of the things I have found, especially in this chapter, I found a number.
I like it better than flex.
Well, yeah, no, I was just gonna. This is Adam. Actually, this is what I was just gonna say. Finding myself. I think this book is very insightful, and it's really been worth reading. I'm glad we did it. I mean, I really go through it with a fine tooth comb to prepare for book club, and it's been worth it for me to do that. but some of his choice of words gets to be a little bit annoying. It's a little idiosyncratic after a while. It's sort of the professor complex of having to come up with something innovative, and it doesn't always work, but that's all right. This is
Which is why I love Fritziak and Snyder. But neither of them have really done an in-depth on the Maidan like this. But those guys do a really good job of making it make sense and not using words to sound more, to make the concepts more complex than they need to be.
Yeah, that's really true. They remind me of Winston Churchill's writings. Extremely clear, no jargon. You know exactly. As they say, if you're a real master of your subject, you can explain it simply so someone who doesn't have any background can understand what you're saying. And both Fritzak and Snyder are very good at that. It's yeah. But whatever. This is, as I said, I think this book has really been worth the time that we've been putting in on it. He's calling, yeah,
And we also have to give him a little bit of leash too, because he's trying to explain something that's totally new. And I think what he's going to get across by the end of the book is that, the society created by Maidan is like a rejuvenation of what our civil societies need to be. And he's going in some circles, getting there, but we need to pay attention.
Yeah, that is a very good point. I mean, I don't know if he's the first, but it's certainly the first treatment I've seen that has approached the revolution of dignity as an important world event. Much more than, as one of the great revolutions on the level of the French or American revolutions or the Russian Revolution. And I think that's correct, and it's good to see. This again is giving Ukraine its due, what it should be, the respect and appreciation it should be getting. So, we'll give him a little bit of a pass for some of the complicated wording. Anyway, I want to start. We did a little bit of this. I want to just go very quickly over what we covered last time because it's harder to jump into the middle of this. He was talking. We're talking about this time about the new actors, the new Ukrainian political class that did not exist before Maidan. Before Maidan, it was Ukraine was pretty much post-Soviet, and a lot of the people in positions of power were holdovers from the last days of the Soviet Union. After Maidan, things changed. They were new actors. They were what he calls a proto-elite from Ukraine's urban private sector and from the nation creative class of managers, entrepreneurs, programmers, journalists, and university professors, people who were not involved in politics at all before Maidan, people who actually made great economic sacrifices to go into public service after Maidan because they were so committed to progress of the country. Wynnyckyj actually was he was in the Department of Education. He was not the minister, but like a one level below that. So he doesn't mention that, but that I also discovered. He talks about the new values, and let's say not new values, the values of Maidan that were not necessarily all that well articulated before, because I think many of these could not have sprung from nothing. These were Ukrainian values beforehand, but they became more prominent and more widespread after Maidan. He calls these values the specifics are self-reliance, entrepreneurship, civic activism, which we certainly saw at Maidan, and rational rule-based relations with the state, and merit over connections. All of these are not Soviet values, and this was where Ukraine was really striking out to make its own path. There was a revolution in economic sectors which had previously been dominated by neo-feudal financial industrial groups, as he calls them, by which he means the oligarchs. The result of all this was a revolutionary transformation of Ukraine's socio-economic and political structures. Okay, the questions? Who were these people? Who was this new elite? It was mostly urban dwellers. it was the people with professional backgrounds, upwardly mobile middle class people with entrepreneurs, managers, artists, young academics, and journalists with and the values as well. The values he mentions again. He mentions them several times: self-reliance, innovation, limited government, entrepreneurial freedom, and meritocracy. Um, he points out that this differs significantly from the Ukrainian majority, that it's a value shift from conservatism and dependence on the state. And we talked about this a little last week, but I just wanted to mention here too that it's important to understand that um, dependence on the state was not necessarily a Ukrainian value; it was a Ukrainian necessity. During the Soviet Union, it's the only you were dependent on the state. There was no getting around it. So this was something that I think, like a snake shedding its skin, Ukraine had to get rid of as it became a free and independent democratic country. Um, these bourgeois, as he calls them, this new elite class, formed the heart of the Auto Maidan. They funded a lot of the Maidan encampment. And they also, very importantly, financed the volunteer battalions and the re-provisioning and rejuvenation of the armed forces that had been so almost completely destroyed under Yanukovych. Um, and some people say that at this point was really the birth of a new state, even though the government was not toppled as such. In fact, this was as revolutions go, was remarkably peaceful. Really, I mean, people did die, unfortunately, as we know from during the Maidan, but there was no what did they call it? What happened after?
Lynch
Yeah, exactly.
mobs.
What happened
The
after the
people who
French?
died from misuse of state
Yeah.
power, not from the overrunning of people power getting out of
Exactly,
control.
exactly. Yeah, the reign of terror is what it's looking for in the French Revolution. Yeah, exactly. And that is a testament to the strength of Ukrainian civil society before the revolution even began, because it could not have sprung from nothing if it hadn't been there already. Um, so anyway, so this, as I said, some people look at this point as really being the birth of the new nation. I know there are people who talk about this war now as really being Ukraine's war of independence, and there is a you could make that case. Should hopefully will be successful and soon. Um, what's interesting about this ideology that this new elite class, this the entrepreneurs and artists and journalists had it clashes with the prevailing social market ideology of continental Europe. And they talked. There was a amusing thing where the IMF came to speak to ministers, to talk to them, to try to help out with the very dire economic conditions in Ukraine, and they said that the IMF reps were shocked that the Ukrainian ministers were more liberal than they were. There was a liberal, and it's liberal in the sense of libertarianism, wanting to cut down on government regulation, which they saw as having been used for corrupt purposes in the past, and also a skepticism, which we see still today, of the skepticism of the ability of the state to ensure social equity and economic growth. Ukrainians believe in both of those, but they're not sitting back and expecting the state to do it for them. And okay, let's see. Sorry. Okay, so we're now going to the section called Elite Renewal. And this, we're talking about the people who came into power, who came into positions in the government after the Maidan Revolution. There were quite a few ministers who had actually had no previous political experience. They were people, as I mentioned, were people who gave up successful careers or put them on hold in order to serve. And there were several who were even not Ukrainian citizens, were given Ukrainian citizenship in order to serve in the government. I know there was a prominent financial expert from Canada, who was given from Canadian diaspora, who was given citizenship and served in the government for quite a while. There were three channels of elite recruitment at this point. One was looked obvious to opposition journalists and NGO activists who had been active before, active in the NGO sector before 2013, 2014. And also, importantly, members of the nation Western-oriented banking and investment banking community, which was extremely important because, as we know, the economic situation was bad, and it was very important to have people in positions to negotiate with Western creditors and with people and institutions who might be interested in investing in the Ukrainian economy to get sufficient money and for the state to function. Well, as I said, for the financial rescue package. And Adam, over to you. Oh, he's here. Adam even put in memes this week. This is great. Okay, go ahead, Adam.
Sorry, I was posting the meme.
I'm so sorry.
I just ran out of time.
Sorry about that.
But I'll put it in the nest here while I'm talking away. It's funny that these type of activists are kind of like what lots of right-wing Westerners consider needs to happen when they say, we need a businessman, not a politician running our government. So I just threw up my favorite meme about it in the nest, because I think if any of these folks who if they actually hold these values in their hearts, then they should know that this book's so funny to me because it's such an academic thing, and the academics is always accused of leaning left, and here's this guy writing this book being like, no, Maidan was about free markets and rules-based order, you guys, seriously. But Nazis, gay Jewish Nazis, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, well, that's another topic. The mythical creature that the Russians had built up in their minds. But anyway, yeah, thank you. Okay. Flexions. You like this word. This is the next section in the chapter, and this is one of these words that I think we could have done without. But what he means by this is this is ultra nimble players who move seamlessly among roles in the public and private sectors, academia, NGOs. These flexions, as he calls them, really were volunteer policy advisors, academics and experts who were not actually serving in government, but served an important role in advising people in government. These were replaced what he calls the legacy elite, who were not able didn't have the will to make the changes that were required. The problem that the government had, though, and this slowed things down substantially, was that because they did not have the night of the long knives, they didn't get rid of everybody. That a lot of mid-level workers were still the same as had been in those positions before Maidan, and we're not necessarily particularly interested in any kind of change. So there was a constant stress between the policy advisors and the people higher up in the government who were really pushing these changes, and the rank and file underneath who were not particularly interested in them. They'd so the Huysman government, who was prime minister from April 26th on, they did manage to make several really important policy breakthroughs: education, healthcare, road construction, and decentralization. Where they fell down, in the Poroshenko administration in general, where they really fell down was anti-corruption and judicial reforms. And this is something that this was created a big problem. And yes, Adam. You have a note here, dear, that I'm laughing at.
Yeah. Sorry, no, my mic wasn't working. Yeah, the chocolate prince. Just because Marcy Shore liked calling what's her name? The
Timoshenko, yeah.
Timoshenko is the gas princess.
Yeah.
You should,
Poroshenko. I will take Poroshenko's oligarchy over Timoshenko anyway. He makes good chocolate. By the way, Adam, I was very sad last week. I ate my last piece of Russian chocolate, so it's time for me to go back to Ukraine. I didn't exactly bring a big stash with me, but I was parceling it out like one little piece a week, my little piece of Ukraine here in Brooklyn, and I ran out. So it's time for me to go back. Anyway, lexicon.
Well, yeah, it's amazing. Ukrainian, and not only Ukrainian, Moldovan, and I don't know, in my experience, East European chocolate for some reason is really good. I don't know if it's because they got stuck in the time when they hadn't figured out how to put all kinds of junk additives in it, and they're back there in the good old days. Anyway, yeah, so I was buying Russian chocolate, and so I asked the nice, ladies there, did they have any that had, like, liqueurs or cognac or anything in them? And the lady looked absolutely shocked and said, "Oh, no, we would never do that." So I guess I said something wrong anyway, so forget that possibility. But anyway, I just wanted to say, as I often do, this time is so much like this very great difficulty. The activists get into government and they can't find anybody in the civil service that wants to change anything that has their taste for shaking things up and so on. It just makes we know that during 2013, 14, whatever, that Zelensky's team, Block, what are they, Quartel 95 comedy troupe was made the decision to do this series, Servant of the People. And so they wrote that, like, that first series comes out in 2015, right during the time that Wynnyckyj's writing about. He's very close to these events because he's writing it during all of this time. And he doesn't have the perspective, that he has today, I guess. But, and we also have to give him a lot of quarter for that. But anyway, I've often said this, that you just start to think, "Oh my God, will nothing ever move?" Because this just seems to be an unshakable system, and it's that frustration, I think, that Zelensky's comedy troupe was expressing, that found recognition in their audiences, like, just massively. Their audiences are basically the great masses of the plain old ordinary folk across Ukraine, and their troupe did shows all over the country. I mean, that's one thing. They learned the country inside out through their years of doing sketch comedy and doing this series. And I just once again, as Adam often and James often says, if you want to know what Ukraine looked like to ordinary people, just watch this series and watch it a couple of times to get the full benefit. But yeah, I think about it every time I read through sections of this book. It was just an endless merry-go-round, and you wondered if anything would ever change it. And of course, I don't know if Zelensky could have, but this war sure looks like it has been doing that.
That is something I think Fritzak pointed out too. And much as this wars in general are horrible things, they do tend to be catalysts. And it is possible that some of these changes would not have taken place so fast otherwise. Obviously, we'd rather have it had peace and have it take a little bit longer. But since it is what it is, it's a good point. Okay. So he points
Hello?
out. Yes. Do you hear me? Who is that?
Yes,
Oh, yes, in
I'm
this
Maidan.
in this space generally we ask people to put their hands up and then we're happy to call on them in order,
Okay,
okay?
sorry.
Okay, but go ahead since no one has a hand up now. We'll go to you. Yes, what would you like to say?
What? What? Sorry, what? I put the hands up, okay?
Yes, please. What would you like to say? It's over to you.
Or I can I now say
Yes,
yeah,
yes, please do.
a poem from okay, a poem what I've got written. Yes, the red button in Putin's house could be a dummy in any playroom in his tiny house. So maybe it was a labyrinth, and now gradually a madhouse in which the dear uncles from China India, Europe, Pakistan, and USA still him let him run free. Yes, for reasons they still him let shirtless in pink military shoes, ride stuffed animals, preach freedom, justice, democracy, etc. While the Russian soul bleeds too. But when everyone is tired of self-centeredness, he comes to Elba without his yacht, completely free on Flipper and Lassie in lucky time, Sonny. There he can live his individuality in a huge bouncy castle. So it's foreseeable that Putin's strategies will become transparent worldwide. It would I not I would confront him with with this history before and after the Tsar, when Federated States bordered Ukraine longer. As a result, the human, cultural, and historical proximity, but also the diplomatic one, is greater. It is Ukraine, a free multi-ethnic state of Ukrainians. I remember the post-Tsarist period and its historical traces, as well as the responsibility that Russia brings with it. But when Putin, and especially the Russian souls, feels that the lines Bekle of argument are unacceptable abroad, internal resentment grows and his moral plummets. I think that recognizance and sanctions prevent Putin from assuming such enduring responsibility towards Russia and the whole, hey, if goes underground, this shit. Yes, no one of this fucker of family, friends, or fans will be glad. That was it. That was it. Thank you.
Yeah,
Hello.
thank you very much. We
Bye
appreciate it.
bye.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Yes, bye. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Also, bye bye,
Okay.
honey pie.
Do
Bye
побачення.
bye. Yeah.
Okay, bye, buddy. Or turn your mic off, please, and
From
we'll go
Harlem.
to James.
Papa.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us. Um, okay, Adam. Let's see, where were we? Um, okay. Okay. So we're talking about the changes that happened in Ukraine. The structural changes in government that happened in Ukraine as a result of Maidan. And Wynnyckyj points out that this is not. Yes, dear.
James had his hand up.
I did. I
don't think
don't see.
Robin's
I
seeing
don't see.
hands.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, just yell if you say hey,
I
because I
feel
don't
like
see
if
them at
I
all. Yeah.
did have my hand up, but I just put it down.
Okay. No, go ahead,
But
James. Yeah.
yeah, okay. Quick thought. I was just thinking about this knowledge in light of the Zelensky effect, and just noticed that entrepreneurship and kind of the personal, um, I don't know, the personal part of this country really makes the difference. I didn't see those kind of points in there um, that was as an important thing. So this is a really good addition to uh, what I think Ukraine is made of. This idea of entrepreneurship. This is a lot of people who individually can do a lot. And so just that rings a bell for me too, because Man and His Symbols, Carl Jung's book, talked about individuation. I was just listening to that. What a great listen that was. And it made me think a lot about like what is a good place to become the individual that you are. And every time it comes up, like liberal democracy is a good place to do this. And so I appreciate like the nod toward that coming out as a business entity, perhaps as an entrepreneur, but there's other ways to individuate. So I want to say that it has lots of good karma, because Ukrainians seem to encourage self development and all of that. And I appreciate that kind of society where nobody, it's like, except for you, because you're whatever's wrong with you that I think is wrong with you. And no, you can never be that good as we are. That kind of shit I can do without, but Ukraine does not have that in depth. I know everybody's got a few Nazis, but they don't have many.
Yeah, thank you, James. Yeah, I found, the Ukrainians are very thoughtful people, and I find that in the diaspora too. It's there's an attitude toward learning and thinking and about self development or whatever that is really standing Ukraine in very good stead at this point in the development of entrepreneurship, and it also shows, it's interesting. I think in western part of Europe, especially, entrepreneurship gets a bad rap. It gets connected with cutthroat capitalism, and I think that seeing how it progressed in Ukraine, that this entrepreneurial spirit was the same one as the spirit of working to make better the entire country, is shows, another side of it. That I don't think that capitalism is good and bad of itself. It's how it's used. But this does give us a very a hopeful way of looking at, what a liberal society can, how it can develop with the wealth generation that brings everybody along with it. It doesn't end up with one elite that monopolizes everything. Anyway, so and okay, so he makes the point here that there is he sees a worldwide tendency away from authority emanating from a hierarchical position, to be replaced more by influence, and he places Ukraine in a broader civilizational context of this happening in many parts of the world. I think this may be a little simplistic. I mean, there are definitely places in the world where there are still oligarchies and authoritarian rulers and whatever. But I like the fact that he's feeling that this is a positive trend. Anyway. Um, Post Maidan, there was a shift, as we said, in organizational norms of society, which he outlines here. He says, first of all, they replaced this oligarch controlled financial industrial groups with a rigid hierarchy, and with rank being the important thing rather than expertise, replacing that more with horizontal cultures and structures that are common to IT and service sector companies, where there's a preference for teamwork and familiar structures. And as he mentioned before, my son is in IT, and he points out, he says, it doesn't matter who you kiss up to. If you can't do the job, you can't do the job. You have to have the abilities, and that, this was evaluating people for their actual abilities, not who they were connected to or who they had managed to bribe. Is an important part of what was going on in the Ukrainian government at this time, and hopefully is still going on. Um, and he says, at the time that of the writing, which is in 2019, the transformation was started, but the question was, how long the changes are going to take, and obviously still an open question. I think, as we were saying, sometimes being in a war actually accelerates some of this change, and they've made incredible uh, progress with anti-corruption and in reforming the judiciary. So, they're definitely going in the right direction. As of 2019, he wasn't so sure exactly how fast it was going to go. All right. Okay. Okay. Oh, James, I thought of you when I wrote this section. It's called de-oligarchization, which is one of James's favorite things. And in this section, he discusses a lot of specific groups of oligarchs, which I'm not going to go into because, yeah, it's interesting, but I don't think we need to talk about each oligarch and exactly what he was in charge of and what, and what was how they were dealt with. If you're interested in that, he goes into it in quite a lot of depth, and you can take a look at the book if you're interested in the specifics. He's got them there. But what?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a step-by-step list of all of the things that Ukraine did, post Maidan, pre full-scale invasion, to extricate themselves from Ruski Mir. But definitely, I agree. No need to just spend time pronouncing those names and regions.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, the bottom line really is that all the key, like for example, in the Party of Regions, all the key representatives of the Russian lobby of the Party of Region took off, they hightailed to the Russian border to avoid prosecution. So, so that was a good thing. Although, as he points out, others were elected to the Rada and avoided prosecution this way. And you make a point, Adam.
Oh yeah, sounds familiar. Getting elected successfully to avoid prosecution, right, James, Mr. Schizophrenic Saki Hand? Is it hot?
Sake.
Oh, we're back on conference. Hot sake in St. Petersburg hotel rooms, only in the privacy of your own home.
That was not the point I guess I was going to make. Oh, you blew it out of my mind, Adam. It'll come back to me shortly. Honest to God, that just that did it for me. That was how tenuous my link was to my thoughts. So
I have no problem interrupting Robin reading her extensive and beautiful notes as soon as your hand pops up.
It occurred to me. I wondered if this section did a better job at explaining the de-oligarchization law than did the Zelensky effect.
I don't know. What do you think, Adam? I don't think he really described exactly the steps that this law took. Just the result. That may be a topic for another time. Yeah, it would be interesting.
Yeah, thank you. No, I am interested in what's the secret sauce.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's definitely. We'll try to look around and see if we can find somebody who writes on that specifically. I'm very interested in the Ukrainian legal system, and I have not found much of anything in English written recently about that. So if anybody knows of something, please. It will be a few years before my Ukrainian is enough to be able to cope with a book length, treatment of the Ukrainian legal system. Unfortunately,
you don't think Google Translate would just do it?
Yeah, right. Oh Lord.
That's cheating, James.
Yes, this is true, Adam. Absolutely true. I don't like to cheat, but also
according to Robin.
One of the things, one of the reasons I have given up on these stupid Google Translate is that translations are horrible. I mean, there are sometimes I will look up a word in I use reverso, and I'll look it up. So taking Google Translate, I will get a completely different definition, and if I search it in as a different part of speech, I'll get something otherwise completely different. This is not Ukrainians' fault. This is the fault of they really. I've never dealt with another language where the tools for translation have been so bad. I think part of this has to do with with people, these Slavic studies departments seeing Ukrainian as sort of a stepchild and not giving it the attention that it deserves. That's being remedied to some extent now, certainly by Yuri Shevchuk at Columbia, who has written a wonderful Ukrainian English dictionary, but it only covers what it covers, So anyway, yes, I could go on about that, but yeah. Anyway, I know. In other words, Google Translate is it's not going to do it for a book-length treatment of the Ukrainian legal system, unfortunately. Skykiss, hi, over to you.
Hi, I just wanted to say briefly, um, a, a friend of a friend, okay, is Ukrainian, but he lives in the United States. His English is very good, but he's Ukrainian. And he said that just what you said, I think it was yesterday, we were in a space and he said, okay, he took somebody's Google translation and he retranslated it. And then he just laughed and he said, "Oh my God, that's just terrible. It's completely wrong." And it got so many things wrong. So Ukrainian must be really, really difficult because I've done, used it for translating French. And I'll go, okay, that makes sense. So when I'm reading French, I'm probably like at oh goodness, I was in 10th grade, the last time I had French. And yet I can look at it and tell whether or not the Google Translate is getting it basically right. I have no experience except for hearing with Ukrainian. So what he said was Google Translate, it just gets it so wrong. So it is much, much better if we get a Ukrainian to help us with the translation because Google Translate is going to mess it up. That's all I wanted to say, to give you that support that it's just really no good at this point. Maybe when they get Ukrainian working together with AI capabilities, maybe it will get better. It's just a suggestion. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Sky. Because it actually, what you brought up at the end is actually is an important point. One of the I was told by my Ilya, my Ukrainian conversation buddy, that when he has to translate things from Ukrainian into English, that he finds, and I agree with him, that the best result you'll get is by putting it into ChatGPT. ChatGPT does a lot better at this than, and even with poetry, a lot better than Google Translate or any of the others. But ChatGPT is not a dictionary, so it's very cumbersome to use that to try to look individual words up. But if I would, that's what I would recommend to people. If you have something in Ukrainian and you want to figure out what it is, your best bet is to to put it into ChatGPT and see what comes out. Tracy is telling me that the Verkhovna Rada has a lot of this legal stuff up. Thank you. I'm going to have to check that out. All right. Let's see. Where were we? Oh, we get to, we get into some interesting side discussions sometimes, Adam. I really enjoy it. And before we go back, let's go to Arya.
Good evening, Adam, Robin, and everybody else. Sorry, I only popped on towards the end of this discussion. I've been a little busy tonight. But just in regards to what you just said, Robin, that is true for the paid better versions of ChatGPT, not some of the more basic versions. I found that the best way to get Ukrainian translations, or any other translation for that matter, is going through the Android's Google Lens and using the Google API for translation, which is otherwise not what they use actually for Google Translate, right? So when you type in Google Translate, you get a completely different translation than the one they give you through their API speech package, which is used for actual translation with their software, and it's far superior, right? I've taken whole books and translated them where there's maybe occasionally a word or two that it clearly gets wrong, and you can fill in the blanks, and it's much better than ChatGPT. It's much better than the paid speech processing programs and services that they'll charge you online to use. And I've tested it with Russian. I've tested it with multiple languages. There are certain languages that none of these services, unless you get a real person, do well. Farsi is a good example of this. It's very hard unless you have somebody who understands a Farsi to get things translated. But for Ukrainian, it's flawless. There's been a couple of books and informationals put out by the Ukrainian government and various NGOs and stuff that I've wanted to read and gone through, and it's almost as good as reading an English language book.
Thank you. Thanks. Yeah, that's great to know. Of course, Adam, we all know that the best way to do this is to just spend the next 20 years and try to learn Ukrainian. Sorry. Oh man, well, you all know I've heard.
I can definitely tell you the way to not do it, which is to go through 9 years of Ukrainian bilingual school, forget everything, and then try to learn it again when your brain is half the size it was.
Oh, try to start learning it when you're in your 60s, darling. But I mean, it's worth every drop of blood I've sweat over. Ukrainian is a beautiful language. I was actually talking to my engine buddy in Mykolaiv, who's a Russophone. He learned Ukrainian in school, but he basically speaks Russian and Sergic. And he said to me, we're helping his little cousin with her English, and I said, so what do you when you're discussing this with you, do you discuss it in Russian or in Ukrainian? And he said, well, she's learning Ukrainian in school, so we talk about it in Ukrainian. And it's such a beautiful language. And I thought that was so nice. I mean, this is how I feel, but this is somebody he said, when I was 3 years old, nobody gave me a choice. I learned Russian as my first language, but it wasn't something I chose. And so, even this person who's, he's in the midst of everything. He's a Russian speaker, and he said it's such a beautiful language, and it really is. I think one of the things that makes my blood run cold is the thought that if Ukraine hadn't gotten its independence in 1991, linguists had predicted that by the middle of this century, Ukrainian would have gone the way of Belarusian, which has been almost completely wiped out by the Russians. And boy, what a loss that would have been. I'm so thankful that that did not happen, that Ukraine managed to get its independence and managed to build a strong democracy and to really, really strengthen its language and history and all of that in the country and the culture, so that it's now quite quite strong, and it's there for all of us to learn and enjoy. Anyway, okay, that's my public service announcement for why you should learn Ukrainian. Anyway, okay, back to this. All right, okay, so we're talking about the de-oligarchization, and all of the oligarchs lost a significant amount of wealth and economic influence in the post-Maidan era. To quote him, he's the most obvious and most controversial exception to the post-Yanukovych de-oligarchization trend was President Poroshenko, whose net worth was estimated to have topped $1 billion for the first time in 2017. But as I said, Adam, he's the most palatable of the oligarchs.
I totally missed that until you pointed it out.
Sorry about that. By the way, for anybody who's as dense as I was standing outside the Roshan store in Ivano-Frankivsk, having bought some candies for the daughter of the friend I was visiting, when it suddenly occurred to me that Roshan comes from Poroshenko. So Roshan is, the middle of Poroshenko's name, but that's because I'm very, very slow. Anyway, so as he points out, there's a question with Poroshenko, but regardless of anything, the levels of corruption post Maidan were much, much lower than under Yanukovych.
And you know what else, Robin? Porco chocolates doesn't sound as good.
This is true. Oh dear, I'm sorry, folks. We do get silly here. Okay, anyway, the scales of Yanukovych's up thievery, which I will discuss as soon as I go to James. Go ahead, James.
This is it really is an interesting topic. And so I just wanted to say, I just Googled, I'm using Google, de-oligarchization laws, and these are the titles that came up. I just think it's so informative. The bills on oligarchs in Ukraine, that's Wikipedia. Wilson Center, the paradox of de-oligarchization. I want to hear about that now. Georgia revised draft law on de-oligarchization and the law of Georgia on de-oligarchization. Those were the top titles that popped up when I searched for that. So I think there's just so much here that's possible, and it's so important for the world probably to get the oligarchs, explain things to them.
Yeah, dealt with, and thanks for mentioning Georgia. I actually had meant to mention this earlier. Let's give a thought to what's going on in Georgia tonight. There's apparently demonstrations outside of the parliament in Georgia. It looks like it may or may not be the start of the Georgian Maidan, but Georgians are furiously demonstrating against this. What is it called? The Georgia Dream, the Russian backed party that pretty much stole the last presidential election, and just hope that the Georgian people are able to wrest their independence away from Russia. This will give them
Parliamentary election.
I'm sorry.
Parliamentary election, I believe.
Oh, what did I say? Oh, I'm
the
sorry.
stolen
Oh,
one a
was it?
month
Okay, it
ago.
was parliamentary election. Yeah.
The president of Georgia is still based. For the time
That's
being.
right. Okay, yes, you're right.
Tracy has her hand up though. Robin's not
Yep.
seeing hands, and I have trouble getting people up. So it's like we each have.
Yes.
It's like we're in a three-legged race.
Go ahead, Tracy.
Go ahead, Tracy.
You make a great pair, and I found it. It is law number 1780-IX, and it is 33 pages and 511 kilobytes. So that is your de-oligarchization, I can barely say that word, law, James.
Thank you so much. That's
Hello?
exciting. Are you going to put it in the nest? I'd love that.
Absolutely, I can do that, if that's okay, Robin, Adam.
Hello.
If I could get my mic
I'm-
off, please do. Please do.
I'm on it. I'm here. I can tell it. I can speak. Hello. Good morning.
Hey,
Hello.
sorry, you had your hand up?
Yes. Yes,
So people have their hand up, and then we call on you. So
Okay, I hold
so
it.
you want to put your hand back up?
Sorry.
I'm going to go to JT, and we'll try it again the correct way this time, my friend. So keep that hand up in the air,
Yes,
and we will get to you. I was actually about to get to you, but since you interrupted for the second time, I'm going to have to flex some co-host muscles and go to JTS first. But I will go to you after Medaus. And you can tell me how to say it as well. Go ahead, JTS.
Yeah, thanks, Robin, Adam. Robin, you brought up what's going on in Georgia tonight. Obviously, that was sparked by the people's frustration on the corruption of how their elections went. I'm not a Ukrainian history. I obviously know about the Maidan revolution. Was that similarly sparked by a specific event, or was it just like a slow boil that finally rose? I don't know the answer to that, and I'm curious if anybody could comment on that.
Yeah, I can give you the quick the Cliff Notes version. What precipitated Maidan was that Ukraine was about to enter into an association agreement with the European Union. President Yanukovych had supported that, and he was on his way to, I think it was Tallinn in Estonia, to sign the association agreement when he after a talk with Sauron Hula Putin, He reneged on that, and this, especially Ukrainian young people, basically saw some part of their future being grabbed away from them. But a lot of people hung on in the face of Yanukovych's obvious corruption, because they thought that once this association agreement was signed, that Ukraine would be pulled closer to the European Union and um, would have to meet benchmarks of the EU, which would have required a lot of this corruption to be taken care of. At the point where he refused to sign this, and Ukrainians saw themselves being pulled back into the Russian orbit again, the demonstrations started on the Maidan. Um, it quickly morphed into a demonstration for dignity and human rights and freedom and rule of law in the country. But that was the precipitation, was the reneging of signing the association agreement with the European Union.
Thanks, Robin. Appreciate it.
Okay, now Medaus, is that how you pronounce it? We'll go over to you. Tell us how to pronounce that, please.
Hello, Medaus. Medaus Barsukas is Lithuanian, a pseudonym, AK,
Interesting.
honey. Yes, interesting, very interesting. I only wanted to tell something. After annexia Crimea, they wanted Nord Stream 1 or second pipeline up. Yes, yes. Okay,
I'm sorry.
and
Can you repeat that?
they
I didn't understand what you said. What you meant?
okay.
Sorry.
They wounded the Schroeder, Merkel, Scholz, Altmann. No, not Scholz. Yeah, oh, Scholz were there. They don't give up.
The Germans wanted Nord Stream.
No.
Yeah.
What? Please, excuse me.
The
They don't want it,
oh,
Nord Stream?
misunderstood.
Miss.
No, I was saying that's what you were saying, was that those former German leaders wanted Nord Stream to go through.
They
Is
don't
what I thought you
want
were saying.
it, Nord Stream. They wanted Nord Stream. They needed was Nord Stream. Like the Chinese, they sold the trademarks from AEG to Zündap. Yes, VMS. Uh, uh, oh man, oh my, oh much more. And the trademarks they sold. The trademarks they sold, and then from A to Z. Yes. No. And then they sold it in Moldavia, Slovakia, Polakia, and there were all. That's another. The cheap gas from Nord Stream 2. That's it. Yes,
Yeah.
they've sold it. No, no, no. After, excuse me, after annexion of Crimea, they wounded Nord Stream second up, and they, yes, like from the Han dynasty. What there from Uyghur? They like KZ, yes, but from AEG, not Batha, no, no. That's many trademarks they've sold it. And they made, and they bought it and they sold it. Like the gas. Sorry, that's it. Yes, that's it.
Okay,
Thank
thank you.
you.
Yeah, thank you. Let's go on to James now.
No,
I can't talk.
James, yeah,
I'm sorry, can't
James.
talk
Oh,
now.
okay. So let's go on here. What we were about to discuss, the scale of Yanukovych's thievery, which was discovered after Maidan. They drove Yanukovych out of the country. And I must say, I knew that it was pretty bad, but I'm astounded at the level of it. 1.5 billion USD personally belonging to Yanukovych was confiscated and nationalized by court order. Thank God they got a hold of this. It's a small portion, but at least they got up to 3 billion USD was trucked out of Mychailo in December 2013, when he was getting ready to hightail it out of the country. 3 billion. The acting prosecutor general said that Yanukovych funneled perhaps up to 100 billion USD out of the country, which may be an overstatement, but whatever it was a ton of money. The scale of graft by the regime was unknown to the public until Mezhihiria, I really should have written this in Ukrainian, was open to the public. And it apparently is still, next time I in Ukraine, I want to go visit this place. It's apparently a real museum of extravagant excess and, of the bad old days when to be president meant that you could basically rape the country. He It became a symbol of centralized payments up pyramid that the regime had constructed. Everybody benefited. That ex-energy minister Edward Stavitsky had 42 kilograms of gold bars and 4.8 million, which he accumulated in less than 2 years. And this was left behind when he fled. It was probably only what he wasn't able to drag out in suitcases as he left the country. So, you wonder if this is why when people talk about how bad the Ukrainian economy was, think about what the Ukrainian economy would have been like if they hadn't had all of these vampires sucking the lifeblood out of it. I mean, the fact that there was this much that they managed to steal means that there was a lot going on economically. Yeah, Adam, go ahead.
That dream sequence that Zelensky has in the show "Servant of the People," where they manage, he just dreams that they manage to get the oligarchs into prison, and everyone has European butlers trying to learn
Yes.
Ukrainian, and they have to institute helicopter traffic laws because too many Ukrainians are taking their helicopters to work, and it's become a safety problem. Anyways, a little bit extreme and very funny, but I thought it just reminded me of that, and I'm just watching Servant of the People again. And
Yeah.
But anyways, we've got JTS with a hand, so let's go to him.
Yeah, Robin. If my memory serves me correctly, once Yanukovych fled and they went to his palatial residence, didn't he have a private zoo on the grounds?
He did indeed, and he was interviewed at one point about it. And he said, "Well, somebody had to feed the ostriches."
Also, I'm curious. You talked about all the billions he fled with. I'm wondering what kind of tax got put on those billions by Putin and some of his buddies. I guess we'll probably probably never know, but
I would imagine
it's a higher than nominal tax rate. I'm very sure more of a vig, I would call it, than a tax rate, right, GTS?
Yeah, exactly right. It's as they're talking about this payments up pyramid. I'm sure that they didn't stop at Yanukovych. I'm sure Putin did just fine in with all of this too. I mean, he didn't have to rescue Yanukovych, but he did, and I can't imagine he did it out of the goodness of his lack of heart. So it had to be some other reason. Anyway, so the overthrowing the ancien regime, as he calls it, the old government was necessary to replace the elites, but that wasn't sufficient by itself to make a true revolution. It required major changes in the social and economic system, a new political class taking power and replacing the ruling elites, and most importantly, getting rid of this patrimonial nomenclatura system carried over from the USSR. This was a big thing that the Maidan wanted to change. This is something that was interesting that I hadn't really focused on, but it is true. The first decade of independence in Ukraine was gradually taken over by representatives of the old Soviet era hierarchy, many from the eastern part of the country, who had made fortunes right after the USSR's collapse because of the weak state. There was a lot of racketeering and extortion that went on. The oligarchs, to some extent, became the state in those very early years. Um, yeah, and Adam, I see you have a note here. Oh, and more memes. Go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, this is the Ruski Mir that Huila is actually protecting. Um, what he fears more than anything is human rights, free press, and free pies, and fair elections being illustrated on their borders, right? So, I mean, all of the talk we hear about NATO, 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 and as we just informed JTS, it was actually him forcing them not to be part of the EU and a Western democratic um, economic union that would make them very, modernized and more free. And that's the Ruski Mir. Um, that's what Ruski Mir really, 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 really is afraid of. Robin.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And the real thing that Putin could not allow to have on his border was a free democratic country with a higher standard of living than what people had in Russia, because the borders were open for until the invasion. Russians went to Kharkiv for the weekend because it was much better shopping there. It was a much nicer place to be than in their hellhole of a country, and it's that could easily have destabilized Russia when people started asking, why was it that Ukrainians, many of whom were family members, there was a lot of, especially in the eastern part of the country, a lot of people had family members in Ukraine and in Russia. There was no difference between the people except for the governmental system. And, Ukraine had reformed and was growing and becoming economic more prosperous, and Russia was still stuck in its backwater. And yeah, that was what it the as this meme that Adam has put in our outline, which I love. It shows human rights, free press, and fair elections. This sort of looks like a werewolf kind of character, and the next to it, a nice little golden retriever or something. And that was Ukraine and NATO. And one of the things to remember about this whole NATO business, this is total BS. When they talk about, oh, Russia was so worried about expansion. In point of fact, Ukrainians were not particularly in favor of joining NATO until after the Russians attacked them. So the if you want to see who's at fault for Ukraine wanting to be in NATO, it's the very country that's complaining about how they're feeling threatened by NATO expansion. If they had left Ukraine alone, Ukrainians were not, before this all happened, there was not a majority in Ukraine that wanted to be part of NATO. But once they saw what could happen if they didn't have the might of NATO behind them because of the Russian attacks, then they wanted to be in NATO. So anyway, so much for Ukraine and NATO not being an issue. JTS, back to you.
Yeah, well, he got Sweden and Finland, and so there's that. I wanted to ask Adam. I've heard you use a name for Putin that I haven't heard before. Can you explain the background of that? Was it I forgot what you called it.
Huila?
Yeah. Can you explain that? I've never.
Oh, it basically means go to dick. So during and it was actually part of this book in the early chapters. That's the direct translation. In the earlier chapters, that some soccer hooligans from Mariupol and other eastern cities, pro-Ukrainian, Russian-speaking soccer hooligans. These are the people that you would think would be the separatists, but they weren't, and they're the ones who actually created the viral chant that is repeated throughout Eastern Europe and Ukraine especially, which is Putin, huila, Putin, huila. So it's just like, it's kind of like saying like Putler eat a dick. There we go. We're not a 501c3
That's
anymore,
right.
so I can say things like that. So, and that's what, and I'll use this moment to preach my personal language policing about the Rusian Federation and whatever. Whenever we give these barbarian animals who rape children and drop bombs on families, the names that their mothers gave them, we're doing a disservice to our language. And Ukrainians have lots of good names for all of them, like Moskal and Huila and
Cuts
all
up.
of these things that are nice little squares, and you can increase your cultural swearing, and you can teach new fun words to your friends in real
So
life.
You know,
it's Huila.
Hui law. It's like hui law.
Gotcha.
and thank you for joining us at our TED Talk on Ukrainian vocabulary. Arya.
While swearing is now on the table for co-hosts, I would like to remind the listeners that if you come up as a speaker, past a very small amount of swearing will not be tolerated unless it is in Ukrainian. So this is one of the few co-host privileges that they have. Now, that being said, again, please remember, if you do come up, to try to please be respectful. We understand people slip. People are on at different times of day, but if you keep dropping F-bombs at a certain point, you will be asked to stop, and if you do not stop, you will be booted, even if we like you. So,
and
poor PSA.
yes, thank you, Arya. And it's yet another reason why you should learn Ukrainian. Because we get a free pass from Ariane here if you can curse in Ukrainian. Although unfortunately, from what I don't know, Adam, you can tell me better than my impression is an awful lot of Ukrainian curses are actually Russian, because Russians have filthy mouths and Ukrainians use some of those words sometimes. Well, I've got a story which I won't tell you.
Well,
But
I'm going to take this opportunity to advertise another Ukrainian voice in space. That's something else we couldn't do in the previous space that can no longer be named. Is early Sunday mornings, my time. I used to participate in it all the time. I don't know if she does it anymore, but if you don't follow Margot Gontar on Twitter, you should. And many Sunday mornings, she has her space, Ukrainian Swearing 101. And it is a mix of, like, obviously, the Russians just go bleh, and Ukrainians say biat. And it's really a nicer version of it, just like Surjik and Polonezia, and like all of these things, like just the way the palette of the Ukrainian language is just more complex and less, like I said, prominent bottom incisor sounding, so yeah. So listen to Margot Gontar. Look for her space on Sunday mornings, which is Sunday evenings, cave time. It's interesting. And there's Tracy to save me. I'm waffling.
I'm just going to agree with you, Adam, because after sitting next to many Ukrainian drivers in Ukraine, I can say that, yes, you are right. It does sound much better when they say those words. And yeah, if you've not driven on the roads in Ukraine, everybody, and if you don't know what the roads are like, well, it's a little bit chaotic is probably the politest way I can put it. And Ukrainians do not mess about when it comes to giving a few swear words to each other whilst driving.
Thank you. This reminds me of one little
But
story, Adam, and then we should get back to this. But I remember reading someone who translates from, I guess she was translating from Russian to English or whatever. But she was sitting in her living room, and her daughter was there doing something, and the daughter didn't understand Russian. But after a while, the daughter says to her, Mommy, I keep on hearing this word blat. What does it mean? And of course, she's not going to say, this is a horror tale about Christmas. She'll be, well, this is how Russians say hello to each other. It's, oh, okay, good. So the next time I see a Russian on the street, I should go up to them and say, Привет, blat. So she had a little trouble getting
did
some.
you see the video? It was going around, War Translated, Tendar of the Rusian Federation sapper who was trying to warn his guys, and then they got run over about he was trying to warn them about a mine, but then they ran him over and immediately hit the mine.
No,
Did you see
no,
that one?
I gotta miss it. Yeah.
The video ends with like, I don't know, and Ukrainians are so funny though. I don't know who edited the video like this, but it ends before like and I don't know if it was the explosion got the cameraman because it was originally published on Telegram, Russian Telegram, but the video ends with the audio of just "Blah!" and
Oh, I love it. I mean, one of the most delightful things about this whole horrible situation is getting to know the Ukrainian sense of humor, which is just absolutely priceless. It's like I had a friend I said a couple of after the election, he said, I've got good news and bad news. I said, okay, what's the bad news? He says, well, we're screwed. What's the good news? Everybody else is screwed too. Anywho, on that note, back to business here. Yeah.
sorry, I was trying to send you the vid. That was good. Back to business.
Okay.
So swearing tangent complete. Back to our very civilized.
That's right. But we do love Ukrainians are just, I mean, what they say, the salt of the earth. I mean, it's just wonderful to be around Ukrainians. I can hardly wait to go back. I'm still trying to get my pet sitter to commit. So the minute she says she can take care of my animals, I'm out of here. Anyway, okay. So we're talking about the period of time directly after after Ukrainian independence in 1991. There was a lot to do. There were the oligarchs who, managed to take a lot of power because things were rather chaotic in the first years. But well known about that period, and very important for the future of Ukraine, was at the same time the grassroots entrepreneurship and the autonomous market sphere were developing. Autonomous of the state. There was an alternative economy, which was to some extent necessary because of the corruption. In fact, at one time they said that 50% of the estimated GDP in Ukraine was they couldn't track because it was in this alternative economy, but it at this point it was part of a transformation of both structural and cultural transformation of the economy and society. And what was going on at that time was that the GDP of Ukraine had ceased to be dependent. On industrial and agricultural production, which at one time, which I didn't realize, at one time the richer part of the country was in the east, the Donbass, where there was mining and rare earth and in heavy industry. Lviv at one point was sort of the poor area, but what happened in the 90s with the shift over to services and IT, that whole divide shifted. Many people left the east and moved westward, and the centers of the economy ended up in the west. Kyiv and the western cities became the hubs. And intangible production services and that kind of thing became the central part of the Ukrainian economy. Okay. Let's see. Excuse me. I'm just reading ahead here. Okay. These were market oriented, meritocratic, and either equal value placed on intangible assets as well as material possessions of these new elites. And Adam has a very, very cogent comment here about this. As soon as he unmutes his mic.
Is it actually cogent?
Well, I agree with it, dear. So that's all right.
Oh yes, okay. No, it's actually one of the most. Yeah, it's cogent. I'll say it for him since he probably doesn't want to say it and seem too biased. Ukrainians are so amazingly innovative and entrepreneurial. Oh boy, spell check, Robin. Look at that.
That is
Some letter
amazing.
salad I gave you.
Well, pretty close. You're missing an R there, but I think most. I don't know. Anyway, yeah, no, this is definitely the case. I mean, it's. I mean, we've seen this, during the war, the innovations in electronic warfare, for example, and just the fact that Ukraine is really Australia, a poor Eastern European country, is managing to do a lot better than the United States in terms of getting everything, getting services and all online with apps and things, not having to schlep down to the Department of Motor Vehicles, your Department of Motor Vehicles with your pieces of paper to do things. It's more advanced in Ukraine than it is in the United States for sure, and that is a testament to that innovative and entrepreneurial spirit in Ukraine, which is even in the government. There is an entrepreneurial aspect to this too, of providing better services. That is to be emulated by other countries. Okay, so by the late 1990s, there was a new class of small and medium business owners that had developed. By the turn of the millennium, a third of Ukrainians were employed by firms that had emerged after independence. So it was a very quick. I mean, we're talking about 9 years. It was an incredibly quick change from the economy as it had been, the hierarchical economy and corrupt economy under the Soviet Union. Now, the distinguishing factor of these business owners was radical skepticism of the state as an institution, combined with an ethic of social responsibility linked to civic mindedness. The business people viewed Ukraine as a country that lived in, not merely a place to make a profit. And well, yes. Some shifting took place during Yushchenko's presidency, but he says a tacit battle between the old Ukraine and the new continued through 2004 to 2009. There's social contests of the rule of capital accumulation, and whose methods of enrichment would become legitimized. They really were fighting out the legal structure at this point. Would entrepreneurship and this level playing field become the dominant rule in Ukraine, or would they slide back into the old oligarchic system where it was who you knew and where you were placed rather than your abilities. Andrew Wilson, who was he's a researcher. One of the reasons the Orange Revolution failed to result in actual structural change, it is because of the weakness of the middle class at that time. That was in 2004. By 2014, by the Revolution of Dignity, that had changed, and there was a strong middle class. And this may have been one of the main causes that the Revolution of Dignity was successful, where the Orange Revolution had a lot of promise, but things had sort of slid back into the bad old ways after a few years. And the members of this creative class were able to form a critical mass, first to protest against the excesses of the Yanukovych regime, and then to form the new political elite that has been guiding Ukraine into the next century. Um, uh, Yes, and bringing the bourgeois dream, as he calls it, which included seeing the state as neither partner nor predator in the economy, but limited to a role as impartial arbiter in the case of disputes. So basically, a small government that stays out of the way unless there's something that needs to be settled. Yes, and Adam, yes.
How small C conservative of those gay Jewish Nazi communist transnational globalist, but also something else,
Yes, well,
guys.
now, yeah, and then radical nationalist fascists, yeah. So, oh boy, we laugh at this, but it's really the Russians have done their best to libel Ukraine and Ukrainians in every possible way. And I think in some ways we laugh at it, and I think it's important to laugh at it because it's ridiculous. And these kind of small-minded, tin pot dictator types, they hate being ridiculed. So I feel that it's important for us to ridicule them whenever humanly possible. Anyway, okay, so after Maidan, there was a startup boom, especially in two areas: export-oriented information technology, and this included a shift from project outsourcing to full-cycle technology services, ready products for Western markets. My son is in IT, and he tells me this all the time. The number of things coming out of Ukraine that they're using in everyday in their everyday work is really amazing. Ukraine is it's a big country in terms of size of the area, but it is let's say it's punching way above its weight in the IT area. The other issue, the other area where there was a real boom was in consumer product and service provision for the domestic economy. Some of this had to do with currency devaluation, where things outside of the country became very expensive. But okay, but they the as I said, consumer product and service provision for the domestic economy became a real thing. This is when the clothes, furniture, manufacture, restaurants, and my favorite institution in Ukraine, absolutely bar none, Nova Poshta, which can get a package across Ukraine in hours. It's an amazing thing. It's a private company, and this was one of the things that came up post Maidan. Now, of course, since unfortunately things don't go smoothly after that, there were the first two post-Soviet decades. He talks about what he calls the new cleavages here. Um, in the beginning, the East-West divide is one of the big divides that has been a historical issue in Ukraine. In the beginning of of independence, the East, as I said before, was generating most of the export revenue. It was monopolized by oligarchs. There was no rule of law was not a thing in the East. It was generally Russian-speaking, heavily populated, supporters of the Party of Regions or the Communist Party. In the West, Western Ukraine, were Ukrainian-speaking poor and supporters of the Orange parties, Yushchenko and Timoshenko. The decade before Maidan, so between the Orange Revolution and the Revolution of Dignity, this began to switch. The economies of several Western cities began to grow, benefiting from excellent math and engineering education from Soviet-era education centers, and a lack of industrial enterprises worth privatizing by the oligarchs. The oligarchs couldn't make out like bandits in the West because they just didn't have these large companies that they could get control of and drain of resources. So oddly enough, the fact that Western Ukraine was poorer at the beginning of this period made it more resistant to oligarchs taking things over, and yeah, this math and engineering education from, as he says, Soviet era educational centers. This persists to this day. Math and engineering education in Ukraine is really is very strong, and we see the results of that in some of the war technologies that they have come up with and other things. Lviv, my favorite city, and maybe Adams too, did not produce a single oligarch, unlike every other large Ukrainian city. There in the West too, there were strong horizontal networks and organizational culture, which was better suited to the post-industrial economy, the tech companies. Um, in to this day, to the day when he was writing this book, and probably still, the confrontation between this model, the horizontal networks and organizational culture, this model, and the oligarchs is not resolved completely, but the legitimacy and viability of these practices has never been as strong in Ukraine in its post-Soviet history as it is now. And you had a comment about Lviv, Adam.
Yeah, just reading this, I don't know if he ever really gets too into it, but my experience in Lviv backs this up. I think it was overlooked by post-Soviet oligarchs, because of a lack of material resources around, and more of a Ukrainian freedom-loving attitude in general. And I believe it was in a unique position, geographically and economically, to have a more organic journey to this Western service-based economy, right? And so, circumstances of history gave us this Vienna of the East. It's a beautiful town. I encourage you all to go. That is all.
Thank you. Yeah, they say, some people say this is Vienna on a budget. If you're spending dollars, it's incredibly inexpensive in Lviv, and it's a beautiful little city. I think I've never spent much time in Vienna, but from the little time I was there, Lviv it's smaller and it's friendlier. It's a very nice place. It's got that old world charm, cobblestone streets and wonderful little cafes where you can sit out in, on a pedestrian area and have coffee and the best pastries and Transcarpathian cognac. Can't wait to go back. It's a charming town. Yeah. Anyway, okay. So back to this. The shifts to this information economy and the post-industrial economy had started pre-Maidan, and the oligarch economic base had already begun to shrink. And what's interesting about this, the question that comes up a lot is how different would things have been if there had been no Maidan revolution? And we go from, it would have still been probably the same because of the way the country was developing to, well, no, it would have been, they would have stayed under the rule of oligarchs and everything would have been worse. Who knows? We can't go back in history and try out the opposite. But one of the points that he makes here, which would lead us to think more that even without Maidan, things were going in a good direction. In 2012, the UN had a study of city populations, and 4 of the 10 fastest shrinking city populations in the world were in eastern Ukraine. And this is, because of that shift in the economy. It was people were migrating to the central and western areas, especially Lviv and Kyiv, for the well-paid IT jobs in Western Ukraine. What's interesting, too, is this did not magnify the earlier East-West divide. In fact, the country became more integrated in terms of attitudes as this was happening. The voting preferences didn't vary as much by region anymore. Part of it may have been the result of Russian aggression. But it could also be there was a more fundamental structural transformation, and I also think too the fact that the populations moved, people moving from the east to the west, were not anymore against the western part of the country. They not only were living there, but they saw more what it was actually like. Let's see. Okay, so the difference. Where was I? Okay. Okay, so instead the differences between these two socioeconomic models became more explicit: the closed oligarchic system versus the open access order model. I don't know. Adam asks whether we learned about open access order from Hitzak. I don't remember him using that term, but remind me.
Or was it at the beginning of this book? I remember we kind of had a thing with lexicon too, because it was one of those phrases that you come across in these academic books that, like, what does that actually mean? But
Yeah.
then we looked it up, and I think it was in Vityak. I'm pretty sure.
Well, I'll believe you. I don't remember it, but yeah, it's very possible. Okay, so the question is, and we lost lexicon. I guess you had to go. Oh well. The question was who is supporting the changes? Ukraine is a large country with many different populations, so it stands to reason that the entire country, all 100% of residents were not, of citizens, were not totally on the Maidan bandwagon. So the question is who was supporting us at most strongly. The Maidan values were most attractive to those in large cities, especially self-employed and IT professionals who really spearheaded a lot of the changes, so this would make sense. He says it was largely foreign to small town and rural residents. So the middle class core was about 25 to 30% of the population. I have my questions about how accurate this all is. Our author is an academic who lived in Kyiv. I don't know. He doesn't tell us how much time he actually spent out in the rest of the country. How many people he knew in small Carpathian villages, for example, or did he have a babusa in a village somewhere? So I don't know. But I haven't been around academics a lot. There is a tendency among academics generally to assume that the urban lifestyle people, the educated groups are the ones who have these progressive values and everybody else doesn't. So I don't know. One of the things that I think is an issue that we have to be aware of is that people who in the towns in the poorer areas of the country could have been a little more suspicious of this of the this entrepreneurial attitude, the small government approach, because um, many of them may have been dependent on government help, and the thought of losing that. And if you're a small farmer, you don't have you can't you're not going to have an IT startup and make a lot of money. Your economic situation is not likely to change much, and this may have been part of the issue, not necessarily being opposed to Maidan, but afraid of that the changes were going to make things worse for them. Yeah, Adam, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah, and I don't think he's spending. Yeah, definitely get the sociology professor who lives in an apartment and doesn't own a vehicle kind of feel from this guy. And that's okay because he still gives us some interesting insights. So I think it's probably also relative to previous conditions and current conditions in non-EU Eastern Euro states, where there is a lack of flush toilets. So maybe he's speaking relatively too. But yeah, he doesn't really spend too much time getting down with the common man.
Yes, exactly. That was my feeling too. And as Adam is saying, this doesn't mean that any of this is not valid, but it does strike me that it would be very interesting to have to. I wish there was someone who, instead of spending all his time in Kiev, had been at the same time out speaking to people in the villages and seeing what their attitudes were. I think it would be very interesting, and maybe somebody did. We may trip across that at some point, which I'd be very happy to hear about. Anybody knows anything like that, do give us a heads up. Um, okay, so now this is interesting. In the past, there was the divide was always supposedly between the East and the West, the Western speaking Ukrainian speaking area and the Eastern Russian speaking area. As we've learned from other books that we've worked through in the book club, this was often more apparent than real. In fact, we certainly saw in the election of Poroshenko and certainly of Zelensky that and the experience of the Russians thinking when they could invade Eastern Ukraine and have Russian speakers just welcome with open arms, that the issue of speaking Russian or speaking Ukrainian was not a big issue for most of the country, and there was not as strong a divide between East and West as people tried to make out. In fact, Poroshenko learned that the hard way. He tried to play that card against Zelensky in the last presidential election and lost by way over 70% of the vote. So this is not an issue in Ukraine anymore, and it never was to the extent that people like to think it was. But what is it going to be going forward? And the first thing he mentioned, this is something that I noticed, and I think this is very insightful, is the issue at this point is more generational between people who internalize the post-Soviet values and practice, what they call the Homo Sovieticus, the person who was hankering back for the good old days of the Soviet Union, and those who hold a more postmodern ethic between the urban creative class versus rural and small town um, residents. He uses the word proletariat, which I really object to here, an old Marxist term. But anyway, so the open question is whether the Maidan values can be made attractive to the voting majority. He says, now this was written before President Zelensky was elected. President Zelensky, who was a sort of a representative of that modern entrepreneurial elite, but at the same time came from Kryvyi and all southern Russian-speaking um, uh, area, grew up in one of those old the old Soviet style apartment blocks. Did not grow up wealthy, um,
Kvartal.
and yeah, a kvartal, exactly. Yes, in fact, people don't know that his his comedy troupe was called Quartel 95 because that was the name of the area that he grew up in. So the Soviets love to put numbers on everything instead of names. Anyway, but yeah, so this is it's that's the question at this point, whether or not this going forward is whether that is going to be the real division. And you had something here also.
Yeah, I think James bringing up the Zelensky effect is kind of prophetic because it's almost like this could be a sequel to this book. I mean, they're totally written in completely different ways, but I think Zelensky, his election, his overwhelming election on a non-populist, non-nationalist kind of, well, maybe a little bit populist, but very non-nationalistic, no reign of terror is going to be happening under our, gay Jewish Nazi president here. And so I think, all of his arguments up to this point in the book about, is it going to be a great revolution in like the American Revolution that was not followed by a reign of terror? And I think the answer is yes. I think it can be said now that obviously Zelensky is not going, to go and hang political opponents in the street. And if anything else, the full-scale invasion after the election of Zelensky in 2019 has made this this choice even more stark between Western democracy and dirty, dirty Ruski Mir.
Again, it's certainly, I think now if you were to do any kind of a survey, which may have been done in Ukraine, you would not find an awful lot of people who want to go back to the old Soviet system of the Ruski Mir business. Yeah. JTS, go ahead.
Yeah, Robin. Hey, thanks for the breakdown of like post Soviet Union Ukraine as far as how the economy has shifted. You call it the post-industrial economy. I'm just curious. When we talked about like the predominantly Russian-speaking areas of the East, I'm not a language expert, but do most of those people also speak Ukrainian? Or I don't know how similar those languages are. So that was my question.
That's a good question. Yeah, Ukrainian and Russian are both Slavic languages. I think they say there's something like a 20% overlap, maybe a little bit more. But Ukrainian is not easily intelligible to Russian speakers. Most Ukrainians understand Russian because it is a bilingual country. People used to learn it in schools and they hear it more. Okay, what was I gonna? Oh, I lost my train of thought here. You asked another question.
Yeah, I think
yeah, go ahead.
all of their entertainment for generations was in Russian. So the use of Russian is in it, you could compare it to the use of English in French Canada. So lots of people. Robin's waving. You got their thought back?
Oh, no. I was waving at Will because he was waving at me. Sorry. And he's up now.
Oh,
He'll have his hand up in a minute.
Excellent. Yeah, so the language question is obviously very fraught, but last week in the previous chapters, JTS, he kind of went through the changing attitudes through the 2000s and pre and post Maidan about language in Ukraine, and basically the idea that the language you speak is directly connected to your political outlook in any country is oversimplistic and lacking all nuance, right? So he kind of explained in previous chapters that a lot of the people who joined the volunteer battalions in 2014 were Russian speakers from Eastern Ukraine who felt civically connected to the idea of a country that can't just black bag you and throw you in a gulag for no damn reason. And so I would compare it for us as North Americans to be like I I don't think you as an American is going to be, because you speak the English language, is going to be bowing down to King Charles anytime soon, right? So it's a choice of practicality, it's a choice of location, but it's not necessarily a political choice automatically.
Yeah, very much
Go
so.
ahead, Will.
And oh, okay, good.
It is a good question, and I'm not sure I know the full answer, but I tell you from my personal experience in traveling in Eastern Ukraine after learning Russian, um, I think it's also the hundreds of years of Russification that Russia has tried to do to all of Eastern Ukraine as a particular focus during the Soviet Union. And the context is too, right, that when I was traveling in Eastern Ukraine, I was apologetic about only knowing Russian, right? Because just from being respectful, I had been living and working in Russia for 8 years at that point, and was going to go travel kind of to see if I could get around without anybody else in working in Russian. But of course, then I did spend some time in Western Russia, but then crossed into Ukraine because I'd never seen it before. Wanted to see it on my way someplace else. The Ukrainians I met with, without exception, in Poltava and Sumy and Kharkiv and all in the areas in the east that I traveled for those couple of weeks. Every person I met, when I'd apologize and try to talk to them and say, "But I only speak Russian," they'd like, "No, don't worry about it," right? Because you're in eastern Ukraine, which was phenomenally Russified by the Soviet Union during Stalin's era and Khrushchev's era. You follow up from the Holodomor and previous to and after the Holodomor, the co-opting of every author that was good, every scientist that was good, every part of anything that was good, any food that was good. Russia essentially tries to say these are all Russian things and Ukrainians should come join the team, right? Just give up Ukrainian language and culture because it's nothing. It's subservient to Russia, and they were welcoming. Russians are welcoming to foreign language speakers. I'd never been in a foreign country of the 16 I've worked in where I felt a group of people that were so welcoming for me to learn Russian and helpful because that was the natural order of things. The Soviet Union was a big, powerful country. It was used to having people come to it, much like if you live in America. Everybody learns English, not because of the English, unfortunately, these days, right? They learn because it's the commerce of it's the commerce of capitalism. Everybody who wants to even air traffic control is done inside other people's countries in English. So it's a pragmatic thing. It's a thing that Russia's obviously been encouraging and trying to Russify Eastern Ukraine, but you can't make, as Adam said, any identification of language spoken and whether or not they identify as Ukrainian. The the empirical tests of that were in the referendum in 1991, where even in Crimea, an area that has been Russified for literally 1,000 years, uh, the "Let's join Ukraine" as Ukrainians won 53%. Well, Trump didn't win anywhere near 53%. A 53% would be considered a big win, probably lots of places. Well, that's what won in Crimea. But around the rest of the country, especially Luhansk and Donetsk, the numbers were in the 90s% of the people wanted to be part of Ukraine. So don't let anybody kid you about language and recognize that there's been a culture of Russification and eliminationism of language and culture of Ukrainian on the Russian side for a long time. And unfortunately, I didn't recognize that at the time, but I do recognize it now, and I think it's important. In addition to what Adam was pointing out in simplicity.
Yeah, thank you, Will. That's absolutely the case. And the thing is that too is that um, was not an issue in Ukraine until the Russians made it one. I have a friend who grew up in Kiev. He's a Russian speaker, and his he. I asked him about this. In fact, I have a couple of stories like this. But he said when he was with his friends that it was very common. He would speak Russian because that was what he was more comfortable with. His friends would answer him in Ukrainian, and this went on all the time. This is how people communicated. In fact, I have a friend who grew up in Western Ukraine. His mother was from the East, and I asked him, I said, "How do you know Russian so well? Did you learn it in school?" He said, "No." He said, his whole growing up, the same thing was in his house. His mother spoke Russian and his father spoke Ukrainian, and this was, it was completely normal. So, and just one very last thing, and then I'm going to go to you, Tracy. Most Ukrainians these days, even in the East, do speak passable Ukrainian because they all learn it in school now. So that is, that is the difference. And with the breakout of the full-scale invasion, many Ukrainians who grew up speaking Russian identify Ukrainian as their native language, even if they don't speak it well, because it's become an issue of national pride at this point. Over to you, Tracy.
Thank you, Robin. I just wanted to give really just explain my experience from being in the East and being in Kharkiv. And although it's only anecdotal, I did meet thousands and thousands of people whilst I was there. We were serving hundreds and hundreds of people a day, sometimes thousands of people a day, and we were going to villages outside Kharkiv. I spent most of my time in Kharkiv, and it's interesting because I had these conversations with Karina as well, and actually on site when we were serving people, I ended up having to learn a few words of Russian so that I could communicate with people, because they were both Ukrainian speakers and Russian speakers coming to us in the queue, speaking Russian and Ukrainian, of course, next to each other. Nobody was getting upset about it. In fact, Ukrainians were very helpful, especially to the older generation who were, of an age where it's clearly much more difficult. I'm talking, really sort of elderly people, really being considerate and helping them out. In Kharkiv itself, in the city, when you come away from the villages, I did experience people speaking more Ukrainian, but not solely. In fact, actually, I experienced more people saying da for yes instead of tak, which is Ukrainian, although they would be speaking Ukrainian, but then they would say yes in Russian. And even Karina as well at home, she has one parent that speaks Russian and one parent that speaks Ukrainian. And I had this conversation with Karina because we had a member come on the team who was really I thought it was quite offensive what he said. Unfortunately, he'd said it away from anybody else and not on site in front of Ukrainians, because he was saying, I'm not going to speak Russian to them people on site if they're saying words in Russian. I'm not going to validate that language. And I was absolutely furious about it. I said, you can't be like that. That's like punishing them again, right? Because Russia's already weaponized the language, taken away Ukrainian from them, forced them in many occasions, unless you're very young, of course, to only speak Russian. And so I asked Karina about this because, of course, it doesn't matter what my opinion is. I wanted to hear what Ukrainians had to say. And we had 3 members on the team, 3 Ukrainian members on the team. And I asked each one of them if they thought that I was wrong to be quite cross that person was saying that. And they said, no, absolutely, we completely agree with you. And something else I experienced on site quite a lot was a lot of surgic, so, a combination of the both. So it's only anecdotal evidence, but I just wanted to give that. I thought it just helps give a picture for people that have not been on the ground there.
Thank you, Tracy.
I've got an
yes, Adam,
about a bar owner that I met from Kharkiv and got me very drunk on my birthday in Lviv, and got a men's choir to sing Mychailo to me. And I took an upside down video of it and posted it on Facebook. Oh gosh. But Bogdan was one of my favorite Ukrainians he met, and he lived in Lviv. He owned a bar in Kharkiv previous to the full-scale invasion. And post-Maidan, he made a rule in his hipster bar in Kharkiv, no Russian. So he put a big sign behind the bar saying, please don't speak Russian. But his funny thing was he did not enforce the rule in the smoking patio of the bar because that would cause fights. And post Maidan, he was saying it wasn't a problem. Like, he couldn't have put that sign up in Kharkiv previous to Maidan, but he could put it up in his bar, tongue in cheek, and kind of only half enforce the rule, just as a point of order. So, but we have to let Ukrainians themselves. We have to let the native speakers of these languages in these areas make choices. So, I strongly believe you were on the right track there, Tracy, because my time in Ukraine was not spent preaching at all how the people who live their lives under imperialist genocidal bombings every night should act or speak. I was just there to learn and listen, and if I'm going to learn a few Russian words in the process, so be it. I'm not going to be a jerk about it.
Thank you, Adam. Yeah, that's the right attitude. And I will say, just one last thing, and then we've overstayed our time, so we're going to be shutting down in a minute. But I just want to say that the weekend I spent in Kyiv, which I've told people about before, I spent with my friend Oleg's mother, who is a Russian speaker, 80 years old, and I have never I mean, we communicated in her not great Ukrainian, my even worse Ukrainian, but we managed. But I have never met such a patriotic person in my life. She was telling me she had been in Ukraine in Kyiv during the revolution, and she brought me down to Maidan Nezalezhnosti, where most of this happened, and she pointed out to me where the snipers had been, and she told me about the people being shot and being lying on the street, and she was crying as she was telling me about this. And this is a Russian speaker, so it's the language that people speak has nothing to do with their identity as Ukrainians, and that's something that I guess people outside of Ukraine don't always understand. Certainly Sauron.
It's kind of the point, though, right? For what Ukraine is,
Yeah,
for what
yeah.
Ukraine's trying to be, is like a free Western democracy where your language doesn't necessarily dictate your politics, because it goddamn well shouldn't. Pardon me.
That's
Pardon
right,
my
and
region.
Ukraine is is quite a diverse society and quite open and welcoming to people with differences, something that people outside of the country don't always understand. And yeah, this is part and parcel of the same thing. But as I said, the Russians have weaponized it to some extent, but that isn't. I have never run into any Ukrainian feeling negative about Ukrainians who speak Russian. They feel negative about the Russians, which they should.
I call it knowing your enemy.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right, Will. Thank you. Yeah. All right, Adam, my dear, I think we need to get ourselves shut down. We're a little bit over. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And thank you so many people who came up and contributed. Really, really do appreciate it. I'm going to go back to Tracy for one last comment, and then we're going to shut down. Over to you, Tracy.
Thank you, Robin. I just wanted to say thank you, actually, to you and Adam. You might not realise that I'm always here, but I am always listening, and I've enjoyed every single book that you've brought to us. But I have to say, this book I've found extremely interesting. I don't think any better than any of the others. Maybe it's just because of the topic, and as you said, Robin, there are not too many books out there on this topic in this way. So I found it extremely interesting, and I'm really enjoying it. And thank you so much.
And thank you, Tracy. It's considering it's 3:00 in the morning where you are. I'm very appreciative that you do manage to stay up, and we have several people who are. This is a crazy time for them, and I see them every week, and I notice, and I'm really appreciative. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and thank you especially the people who came up to speak to us. Again, on the Volya Radio site, you can find the link to the SBU fundraiser if you feel like you'd like to help them out a little bit. It would be appreciated. I know that the guys would appreciate it, and we'll be helping Ukraine to win this war. Anyway, and with that, I think we're going to say goodnight, Adam. It's Slava Ukraini.
Slava.
And skoro pobачимось. See you all soon, I hope. Good night.
Welcome to Volya Radio. Slava Ukraini. Welcome to Volya Radio. Slava Україні!